Chapter 975. Horizons were a decisive factor in a person's mindset and way of thinking. It was just like how modern people looked at ancient people. The former might not necessarily be smarter than the latter in terms of intelligence, but they had the opportunity to come into contact with and learn more knowledge, broadening their horizons. Naturally, there would be a huge gap between them, as well as an inexplicable sense of superiority in their hearts. There is no doubt that Old Chen's appearance had once again broadened Zhang Cheng's horizons, making him realize that the Titans were not the pinnacle of the evolutionary level of an individual life form. On the contrary, this was just the beginning, a starting point. Other than that, the universe might be more profound and complex than the parts he currently knew. Even time and space were only an extremely small part of the entire universe. According to the speculation put forward by some scientists, the universe was likely to be far beyond 3 dimensions, but a complex quantized space as high as 11 dimensions. Of course, the space where humans lived was still in the 3-dimensional universe, so most of it could not be observed. It was just like the dark matter that had always been hotly discussed by physicists but had never been truly observed. As a master of magic, energy, alchemy, and occultism, he could understand the vast, mysterious, and almost boundless space of the universe more deeply than most mortals. In this vast space, infinite possibilities were bred. The content that human technology could observe and understand was not even a billionth of it. The so-called gravity, gravitation, strong interaction, theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, and other seemingly profound theories were just a drop in the ocean displayed by the universe. Whether it was mortals, gods, or special life forms like the Titans that could touch the high-dimensional universe, they could only be regarded as a slightly stronger ant in the face of the universe. After figuring this out, Zhang Cheng quickly abandoned his originally leisurely exploration journey and directly began to slaughter tens of millions of living beings without scruples. He once again opened the door of darkness, allowing the Hell Legion to surge into the human world, completely destroying all the people and organizations that dared to resist or obstruct his plans. He kept all the remaining humans in captivity like livestock, brutally brainwashing and transforming them. In the end, like the worker ants and soldier ants in an ant nest, they were used as tools for exploration, constantly exploring places around the world that might contain relics and keys. As the supreme master of this terrifying army, Zhang Cheng no longer needed to do everything himself. He sat on the throne that his subordinates had built for him and silently watched through the window at the beautiful girls who were crawling on the ground like ants and reciting poems 24 hours a day. Needless to say, these messy things were all done by the dreadlords who were good at currying favor and sucking up to others, especially the first lord of Nazresm, Barum, who almost had the word treacherous carved on his face. All day long, he tried to please his master. Even though many of the bad-tempered abyssal lords and the intelligent Irida demons were dissatisfied with this, they could only bury their resentment in the depths of their hearts and wait patiently for the other party to fall out of favor before adding insult to injury. It had to be said, the advantage of despotism, tyranny, and cruelty was that it could make the lower class feel fear to the greatest extent. Even if there was any resistance, it would be carefully hidden. I can't believe it. You're actually willing to repeatedly destroy and ravage an originally prosperous and civilized world into what it is now. Valeni sighed slightly and took the initiative to break the silent atmosphere in the hall. Unlike Zhang Cheng, he obviously still retained the way of thinking of humans. He was full of sympathy and helplessness for his own kind being oppressed, enslaved, and tortured by the demons. Stupid idea. Zhang Cheng curled his lips in disdain. Don't tell me that if I don't destroy them, they won't destroy themselves? You have the power to see through the past and the future. You should understand that the intelligent life born on this planet isn't just humans. On the contrary, before humans, there were many intelligent species and civilizations. But where did they all go? Without exception, they all walked towards self-destruction in the end, so humans are no exception. Do you know? In your eyes, the seemingly prosperous modern society is actually more fragile than ever. Perhaps a biochemical or nuclear terrorist attack can pull the entire world to the brink of destruction. I just accelerated the process a little bit. Valeni nodded with a bitter smile. Because of this, you're the monster that can surpass everything, and I'm just a slightly timid, weak, and ordinary person who likes to enjoy life. Pardon me for asking, but after everything is over, what are you going to do with me and this terrifying demon army? To be honest, you're just tools to me, just like dogs are to humans. Perhaps the only difference is that I'm colder and more rational than most humans. So I'm not stupid enough to think that dogs are friends of humans. If you were in his shoes, what would you do to a useless tool? Zhang Cheng asked meaningfully. I think I would probably abandon them. Valeni seemed to realize something, and a light flashed in his eyes. That's right. So I suggest you start preparing from now on and find a way to leave this planet. Otherwise, I promise that when I leave, those ferocious demons will definitely find a chance to kill you. Zhang Cheng raised the corner of his mouth slightly, revealing a chilling smile. Valeni couldn't help but shudder at the thought of those demons staring at him with malicious eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, I want to make a deal with you. Oh, what deal? Zhang Cheng touched his chin with a half-smile. He knew very well that Valeni was a person with a strong desire to live. He took the phrase, a bad life is better than a good death, as the highest goal in life. He would rather live as long as he could, and even if he couldn't, he would find a way to resurrect in the future. I can provide the key and address of the fourth seal. In return, I hope you can send me to a relatively safe world. Valeni offered without hesitation. You know the key and address of the fourth seal? Why didn't you say so earlier? Zhang Cheng's eyes revealed a hint of danger, and the temperature in the air suddenly dropped to freezing point. Although he wasn't considered temperamental for the time being, he would never let go of his subordinates who deliberately deceived him. Sorry, I just remembered it recently. You have to understand that I've been in a state of suspended animation for too long, so the memories in my brain have been damaged to a certain extent. Besides, it's not too late to remember it now, is it? Valeni bowed deeply with a sincere expression. There is no need to ask to know that he was a truly smart person, and he knew how to not cross Zhang Cheng's bottom line. Chapter 976. King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms and one of the most important port cities in all of Westeros, had recovered from the war and chaos. A large number of merchants from the north and south once again appeared in the market, as well as nobles who had come from other places to enjoy a luxurious life. Although the nobles of the western region, led by the Lannister family, still relied on Casterly Rock and refused to swear allegiance to Queen Daenerys Targaryen, and the Vale was under the secret control of Littlefinger Peter Baelish, their attitude was ambiguous. However, other places had already accepted the fact that the Targaryens were once again the rulers of this land. The reason was simple. There was a giant dragon named Clo Kelba that was entrenched in the sky above King's Landing. It was unscrupulous in declaring to the world what true and unparalleled power was. Even arrows made of Valyrian steel could not leave a single scratch on its violet scales. No one knew how to defeat a dragon that could not be injured at all, and no one could understand what it meant to be a divine creature. The only thing they knew was that the original owner of this dragon was called Mason, who had once become the richest ruler of the Riverbend area. Not only did he destroy several ancient nobles who had taken root there for hundreds of years, he was also the only legal husband of the queen. However, for some reason, this man with a very suspicious background actually left quietly after he became famous. Some people believe that he and Daenerys did not get along well, and they parted on bad terms. Some people also believe that he had to disappear from the eyes of the world because he had been raped to prevent the situation of the royal power being usurped again. However, only one person understood that Mason's departure had nothing to do with all the rumors. He had his own pursuit and goal in life, and that person was the queen, Daenerys Targaryen. Standing at the highest point of the Red Keep, the young queen was looking down at the bustling port of King's Landing. Without turning her head, she asked the Red Viper, Aubrey and Martell, who was always following behind her, The Lannister family still refuses to surrender to me, right? Yes, your majesty. Oberyn Martell bowed elegantly. Although his private life was very dissolute, he did not dare to have any thoughts about this extraordinarily beautiful woman of noble blood in front of him. Not only him, but almost all the adult males of the great nobles did not dare to have such delusions. The reason was simple. Every time someone approached the queen with some ulterior motive, they were all burned to ashes by the dragon's flames without exception. In the eyes of the mystic dragon, only its master was the queen's only spouse. Then what do you think we should do next? Send an army to completely uproot them? Daenerys subconsciously frowned. Of course. Are we going to let them continue to be kings? This continent only needed one king. The rest would either submit or be destroyed. You have overwhelming power, so why don't you kill one as an example to others? Don't forget, Peter Baelishes of the Vale is valleys of you. He Daenerys of S Landing of the Crown, of the Keep of the Lord of the Keep. Due to their blood feud, House Martell and House Lannister had long since become mortal enemies. If there was anyone who wished to destroy Casterly Rock, it would be him. If the situation permitted, the famous Red Viper wouldn't mind killing everyone with the surname of Lannister, from 70 to 80 years old to newborn babies. In this world where everything depended on one's bloodline and birth, severing one's bloodline was the only way to prevent a resurgence. As for the moral condemnation of being vicious and cruel, it was nothing to the nobles. It wouldn't even affect their reputation. But in today's meeting, some people think that I shouldn't push House Lannister too hard. On the contrary, I should be more lenient and merciful. This way, they will soon choose to surrender and not stubbornly resist. Daenerys' eyes revealed a hesitant look. It was obvious that her childishness had broken out once more. As a young woman who had not received a systematic education and had no experience in governing, her bones were filled with the contradiction between beautiful fantasies and cruel reality. On one hand, she yearned for the respect and love of everyone and didn't want to cause too much slaughter and destruction. On the other hand, she lacked a deep understanding of politics, military affairs, and economics. She couldn't play with power like a truly qualified monarch and firmly control the country in her own hands. In fact, if not for the dragon intimidating all those with bad intentions, the queen would have either been overthrown or reduced to a mere figurehead, or become the plaything of some ambitious people. Your Majesty, a monarch doesn't just have to show mercy. He also has to show a cruel and merciless side. Otherwise, he won't be able to intimidate the nobles who desire to expand their power. Think about it. Ever since you ascended the throne, how many merciful things have you done? But what about cruel and merciless things? You've done almost none of them. Trust me, this country needs your cruelty and mercilessness right now. Oberyn continued to exert his influence in an attempt to change the queen's mind. The so-called feudal system was, in essence, a political game between nobles. Every great noble tried to influence the royal family to achieve unspeakable goals, such as attacking their opponents. In their eyes, there was no concept of a country. Their family and fief were the foundation. Most of the time, as long as they could ensure that their territory and wealth didn't suffer, it wasn't a big deal to change their allegiance. All right, I understand. Please give me some time to think about it. Daenerys waved her hand lightly, indicating that he could leave. When the Red Viper was completely gone, she sighed and muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "Mason, my dear husband, if it were you, what would you do?" At the same time, in an inconspicuous alley of King's Landing's flea nest, two incongruously dressed men silently appeared. One of them was Zhang Chung, and the other was without a doubt Valeni. Feeling the pairs of vigilant eyes around him, Zhang Chung asked with a half-smile, "How is it? Does this place suit your taste?" "Uh-huh. It's a world full of medieval sentiments. Poor commoners, extravagant nobles, and wanton women. My first impression is very good, but I need a few days of in-depth observation. After all, for me, this is an important choice that concerns my entire life." Valeni looked around excitedly, seemingly unaware that Westeros was only a part of the world of the Song of Ice and Fire. It didn't represent the average level of supernatural power in this world, and it wasn't as safe as it seemed. Chapter 977. For Volini, whether or not a world was suitable for him to live in depended on two factors: safety and the openness of men and women. Of course, the safety of the former did not refer to the security of society in the ordinary sense. It referred to the strength of supernatural forces, such as whether or not a terrifying invader would suddenly appear or a terrifying monster would awaken from its seal. As for the latter, all he had to do was to stroll around the special services, and he would be able to tell. Wasn't this less than 2 hours after arriving in King's Landing? He could not help but visit a famous brothel. The owner was a black woman from the Summer Islands. Her name was Satya. More interestingly, she had a daughter named Aliyaya. She also provided all sorts of wonderful services to her customers here. In fact, the long-lost Tyrion the Imp, Oberon Martell the Red Viper, and Bronn the Red Viper, the once-knighted Sellsword, had all been frequent patrons of the brothel. Robert Baratheon, the man with the green steps on his head, had fathered an illegitimate daughter with one of the whores there. But these were not the most shocking things. The most incredible thing was that there was a secret passage inside the brothel that led to a secluded place. According to what Varys said, this secret tunnel was dug out by a prime minister, and the reason was very funny. He didn't want others to know that he frequented this place, so he dug out a secret tunnel. But Zhang Chung would never tell Volini about these secrets. He would not even tell him about the otherworldly demons that were gathering in the north and preparing to invade the south. After all, he was not so magnanimous as to pretend that nothing had happened after being threatened. On the contrary, he would wait for an opportunity to take revenge. That was his true style. His patience now was for the sake of getting back 100 or even 1,000 times the interest in the future. Poor Volini did not understand that his self-righteous cleverness had pushed him into the abyss of despair. He was still enjoying himself in the arms of women, lying in the arms of women and venting his primitive, beast-like desires. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Chung silently went to the island where the Red Dragon, Granada, was imprisoned. The Death Knight Shuma had already transformed the island into a burial ground by killing the sailors of the passing ships. Half-rotten zombies could be seen everywhere, as well as groups of wandering skeletons. They were more loyal to their duties than any guards. They did not need to eat, drink, rest, or entertain themselves. They would not feel bored or tired. Just as he stepped onto the beach, a death dragon covered in deathly white scales descended from the sky. It constantly let out threatening growls, and 2 balls of strange cold light flickered in its eye sockets. Needless to say, this was the dragon egg that Zhang Chung had hatched. It was now more than 35 meters, and it had a certain degree of intelligence. Before the death dragon could launch a probing attack, the Death Knight Shuma, who was stationed here, finally arrived. He stopped his companion's reckless actions through the mental connection and took the initiative to kneel on one knee, greeting with a low and hoarse voice. "Great master, your most loyal servant pays his respects to you. How is it? Did the old dragon underground cause any trouble while I was away?" Zhang Chung directly asked the question he was most concerned about. He tried to summon some of his subordinates to attack the island, but in the end, without exception, they all became members of the Death Army. Thanks to his help, I now have 8 necromancers and more than 15,000 zombies and skeletons. As he spoke, Shuma turned around and glanced at the densely packed army of the Death Army kneeling on the ground. With the help of necromancy spells, he had even transformed many ships into ghost ships. They constantly cruised in the surrounding sea and would immediately attack once they discovered a living person. Seeing this scene, the corner of Zhang Cheng's mouth rose, revealing a devilish smile. He nodded in satisfaction. "Well done. Now, I think it's time to give you another more important mission. Here, take this magic sword and go to the north. Tell those stupid deviant ghosts for me. Either submit or be destroyed. There's no third choice. After subduing the deviant ghosts, kill all life outside the Great Wall of Despair and create a truly invincible army of the undead. As you wish." Shuma said nothing and directly took the two-handed sword that exuded a cold aura. He immediately felt a resonance from the depths of his soul. Without asking, he knew that this sword was actually an enhanced replica of the divine artifact, Frostmourne. In a library on the Dreadlord's mother planet, there was even the entire process of making it. It was not difficult to make it all. As the weakest of the Lich King's two-piece set, Frostmourne's value could not be compared to the Helm of Command at all. Therefore, Zhang Cheng carried out a series of enhancements and combined the abilities of the two divine artifacts into one. As early as when he came to the Song of Ice and Fire world, he had already thought about how to carry out his revenge. That was to create an army of the undead and then threaten the human world, forcing them to hand over Voleni. Otherwise, he would launch an all-out war and completely kill all the living. In this way, this unlucky fellow would become the public enemy of the entire human race. No matter where he fled to, he would not be able to live peacefully. Even if he did not die, he would have to spend the rest of his life constantly wandering. Most of the time, killing a person was not the best way to take revenge. Instead, it was a form of relief. Zhang Cheng didn't want Warrant to die so easily. He wanted to destroy Warrant's spirit and will. He wanted Warrant to slowly taste the bitter fruit of his own actions in endless pain and regret. He wanted Warrant to pay for his foolish actions. As a portal that spanned across the sea and the Westeros continent slowly opened, Shuma led his subordinates into the snowy wilderness and began a new journey. As an undead, the meaning of his life was to create fear and despair, and he was 100% obedient to his master's orders. In the short span of a month, he and his undead subordinates had plundered dozens of wastelander settlements, rapidly expanding their army to more than 50,000. This was especially true for the resurrected giants, who were simply natural war machines. Most human weapons were helpless against them. However, this had nothing to do with Zhang Cheng. Ever since the undead had completely left, he had used his powerful magic to open up a passage, following the direction of the flowing lava underground. Not long after, he arrived in front of the red dragon and teased it with a slightly teasing tone. "Long time no see, my dear Granada. I wonder if you still remember me? It's you. You actually dare to come back? You've appeared in front of me again." Granada suddenly opened his eyes from his deep slumber, his entire body emitting an astonishing aura. Chapter 978. Control your emotions. My dear friend, don't force me to use violence. Zhang Cheng narrowed his eyes as he warned. However, it was a pity that the impression left from the last time they met, as well as the innate arrogance of giant dragons, caused Granada to make the wrong judgment. He opened his bloody mouth and roared, "Go to hell, despicable worm. I'll burn you to ashes." The next second, boom, a ball of scorching dragon's breath gushed out, directly covering the not-so-spacious underground hall. The terrifying heat caused the surrounding rocks to melt into liquid, constantly bubbling and bubbling. Anger. Uncontrollable anger. Ever since it was fooled by a mere human, its heart had sunk into an extremely humiliating resentment that it could not extricate itself from. It was almost constantly replaying the details of what had happened, and this humiliation quickly turned into uncontrollable anger. Now, this anger finally had a channel to vent. The terrifying breath lasted for an entire minute. When the giant dragon stopped, the surrounding rocks that led to the surface had all melted, forming a huge circular hole. However, Zhang Cheng, who had been roasted by the dragon's breath for an entire minute, was unscathed. He still had a faint smile on his face as he casually mocked. "Is this how you welcome an old friend? Or do you think that I'm so stupid that I don't have any confidence in coming back to seek revenge? My dear Granada, it seems like you're no different from your own kind, always so idiotic and arrogant. You block my breath." The red dragon was clearly shocked. Its eyes, which looked like flowing lava, revealed a look of disbelief. "Blocked?" Zhang Cheng shook his head mockingly. "No, in fact, I didn't do anything. The temperature of the magical flames you spat out was too low, to the point that it couldn't even hurt my skin. You and I are already two completely different life forms. I'm much more advanced than you, and much more powerful. As a return gift for your warm welcome, I'll let you see what true power is." Just as he finished speaking, he raised his left hand and sprayed a ball of bone-piercing cold air into the air. In the blink of an eye, the terrifyingly low temperature quickly spread in all directions. In less than half a minute, everything within a radius of a few hundred meters was frozen. Even the boiling magma instantly solidified into hard rocks. Even though the energy contained in the Titan's body was too shocking, making it impossible for him to tear through space and descend directly like before, Zhang Cheng could only use the projection of his consciousness, which did not even reach 1% of the strength of his body. However, it was still very easy for him to deal with a mere red dragon. As he felt his body temperature drop and the flame of life flickering in his chest weaken, Granada finally realized how frightening the power of this terrifying spell was. As he struggled to break free from the frozen lower half of his body, he shouted in panic, "No, you can't do this. Let me go. I can't die. If I die, the dragons in this world will become extinct, and all magic related to dragons and light will disappear. Those silent, deviant ghosts in the cold lands of the north will kill all the living people in this world." You don't have to worry about deviant ghosts. I've already sent my most loyal servants to take them in. I believe that it won't be long before a brand new power rises outside the Great Wall of Despair, a huge empire of death. However, they won't destroy the human world so easily. Instead, they'll act as a catalyst for civilization, forcing the nobles who think they're better than the rest to change. As for dragons, my child Kulo Kelba will inherit your position and become the new Dragon King of this world. Zhang Cheng used an extremely cruel tone to shatter Granada's fantasy. Let go of an old enemy? Oh, please. There are usually only two kinds of people who would do such a thing. One was foolish enough to believe that repaying evil with good would make the world a better place. The other was a show out of special need. For example, the founding general of the Han dynasty, Han Xian, forgave the butcher who humiliated him. It wasn't that he was magnanimous, but that he wanted to make use of this opportunity to improve his reputation. Essentially, it was a political show and artificial hype. As a conspiracy theorist, Zhang Cheng didn't believe that there was a perfect saint in the world. Perhaps some people would occasionally lend a helping hand to those who needed help out of sympathy, but they definitely wouldn't do it for a lifetime. The more a celebrity was praised, the worse the things he did. He might even be a swindler who betrayed the country in exchange for his own benefits. Looking at the red dragon that was slowly freezing into an ice sculpture, Zhang Cheng finally raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! Crash! The huge ice sculpture instantly shattered into pieces, falling to the ground and shattering into thousands of pieces. Especially the head that was filled with fear, perfectly preserving Granada's reaction before his death. "Oomph, you got lucky. If I wasn't in a hurry, I would slowly let you taste the pain and despair before your death. Next, it's time to visit my dear wife and see if she's still as naive and childish as before, treating governing a country as a child's game." As he spoke, Zhang Cheng once again cast a teleportation spell and disappeared from the spot. Just as he left, the small island shook violently, and then with a deafening sound, it sank to the bottom of the sea. At the same time, Valenti, who had just finished a fierce battle with 3 women, was lying on the soft bed, raising his head and gulping down a large glass of wine. He licked his lips and asked one of the fair-skinned young women, "Cute baby, can you tell me what interesting things have happened in the city recently?" "Interesting? I don't know what you're referring to." The naked woman winked playfully. I think these shiny little things should be able to satisfy your greedy appetite, right?" Valenti laughed as he took out a handful of gold coins from his pocket and scattered them into the air. Instantly, the prostitutes who were lying lazily on the bed and chairs all jumped up at the same time, screaming as they fought for the gold. They did not know that gold was the most useless metal in hell. The demons would rather throw it on the side of the road than take a second look at it. Valenti successfully made use of this and unknowingly collected a large amount of gold, ordering the little demon to turn it into currency. There was no need to ask to know that he had been preparing to leave from the beginning. That inconspicuous magic leather bag was filled with 500 tons of gold coins, enough for him to live a luxurious life for the rest of his life. Chapter 979. Your Majesty, you must not be merciful to traitors, especially Lannisters like Lannisters. Especially someone as ambitious as Lannister, who has plotted and participated in many rebellions and even killed the royal bloodline. Blood and death must be used to wash away the sins on their bodies. That's right. I completely agree. The Lannister family must be removed from the list of nobles. Have you forgotten how they treated your parents and siblings in the past? Objection. Although the Lannisters have made many mistakes, they do not deserve death. Don't forget, they have been the guardians of the Western Territory for generations. Once we lose the Lannisters, how can we maintain stability and peace there? Stability and peace in the Western Territory? Don't you know that the Lannisters are now the biggest threat to the kingdom? Idiot. Politics is not child's play. Do you think that by eliminating the Lannisters and destroying Casterly Rock, the Western Territory will obey Her Majesty's rule? Naive. Damn it. Old man, who are you talking about? Do you want to die? I'm talking about you. What? You still intend to draw your sword at the Imperial Conference? Duel. I want to duel with you. Draw your sword if you are a man. Don't tell me the thing at your waist is just an ornament. Seeing that the Imperial Conference had once again fallen into a state of mutual hostility, Daenerys Targaryen held her forehead, a pained and helpless expression on her young and beautiful face. Obviously, this kind of situation that escalated from quarreling to fighting had long been a daily routine. As she had been forcibly pushed to the throne by external forces, her deterrence to the great nobles was limited, especially after the other party found out that she was not a cruel and bloodthirsty tyrant. They quickly became bold and formed 3 stable political and military alliances, constantly staging catfights. Simply put, they were taking advantage of the fact that the queen was young and ignorant of politics, intending to take the opportunity to expand their influence and sphere of influence. Your Majesty, are you not going to stop the lords? A personal maid cautiously reminded. Daenerys glanced at the increasingly chaotic scene and shook her head gently. No need. Let them be. Anyway, in their eyes, I'm just a little girl who doesn't know anything. As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up and left the Iron Throne, disappearing at the end of the dark corridor of the castle. Her personal maid and the King's Guard followed closely behind. Ironically, the Queen's departure was not noticed by any of the ministers, including the Prime Minister. They were still quarreling with each other, with 2 of them even raising their fists and punching each other. There was not the slightest bit of etiquette and restraint that nobles should have. It could be said that the current Imperial Council was not so much an organization that assisted the king in handling government affairs, as it was a feast to divide up benefits. However, when they could not reach a compromise, they would rather drag each other down than let their competitors take advantage of them. Of course, they did not have much thoughts about Queen Daenerys for the time being. On the one hand, the dragons made everyone wary of attacking the rat for fear of breaking the vases. On the other hand, House Targaryen was left with only a single heir. For the time being, they would not be able to threaten the interests of the nobles. On the contrary, as the queen did not even have a trusted aide by her side, she could only rely on the great nobles for help. What else could she do? Were they going to let a bunch of illiterate commoners rule a huge country? What a joke. What was the difference between that and suicide? All of Westeros would be plunged into chaos and famine. Even though Daenerys was a little naive, she was no fool. She could feel the barely concealed contempt in the actions of her ministers. There was no doubt that these fellows had never treated her as a true queen. They did not have the slightest bit of respect or fear in their hearts. Puppet. For some reason, this unfamiliar yet familiar word popped up in Daenerys' mind. There was a period of melancholy in her life where she was controlled like a puppet. When she was young, it was her elder brother and the wealthy governor of Pentos, Illyrio Mopatis. When she was older, she was sold to Drogo to be his wife. It was this kind of wandering life that taught her perseverance and patience. Standing on the balcony of the Red Keep, the young queen took a deep breath and released all the anger and indignation she had accumulated. Just as she was about to turn around and announce the end of the day's Imperial Council, she suddenly realized that the knights and maidservants in charge of her safety had fallen asleep on the ground for some reason. The next second, suddenly, a black figure slowly walked out of the darkness and greeted her with a smile. "Good morning, Stormborn Daenerys. How have you been recently?" It's you. When did you return to King's Landing?" Daenerys' eyes revealed a trace of undisguised joy, and she immediately rushed forward to give him a warm hug. "I've only been back for less than 14 hours. How does it feel to be a queen?" "Ruling a country full of contradictions isn't as easy as you think," Zhang Qing teased with a half-smile. When he walked in from the main entrance, he had already seen the chaotic scene of the Imperial Council. He understood that this woman, who had never received the appropriate education, would not be able to fight against those cunning old foxes. "You saw it all?" Daenerys raised an eyebrow slightly. Zhang Qing shrugged and replied, "That's right. I have to say, you really are a failure as a queen. You clearly have the greatest trump card, but you don't know how to use it. A group of hyenas actually snatched away the power that originally belonged to you. To be honest, I'm starting to regret pushing you onto the Iron Throne." "Trump card? What trump card?" Daenerys subconsciously widened her eyes, quickly thinking in her mind about what other tricks she had not used. "It's very simple. Your trump card is the dragon. Bring Kulo Kelba to Casterly Rock and uproot the Lannister family. Use slaughter, destruction, and destruction to tell those self-righteous nobles who you are. Do you know? The nature of the world is cruel. All the seemingly beautiful emotions like kindness, sympathy, love, and friendship are fatal poisons to a king. To become a king, you have to be prepared to be alone for the rest of your life. The only thing that will accompany you for life is power. As long as you can stabilize your royal power, do not hesitate even if you order the slaughter of thousands of rebels. Otherwise, the country will fall apart, and more civilians will taste the pain of war again." Chapter 980. What was a ruler? A ruler used justice, kindness, and freedom as pretext to do the cruelest and most heartless things. This was especially true in Westeros, a land with a perfect feudal system. Only the most powerful and ruthless nobles had the right to sit on the Iron Throne and give orders. How did the Targaryens become royalty? Was it the justice and kindness of Aegon the Conqueror that moved those lords and kings? No, it was the dragons. The destructive power of the dragon made all the nobles feel fear, and they obediently knelt down and chose to submit. Robert Baratheon also didn't ascend the throne for reasons of justice or kindness. Instead, he had crushed Rhaegar to death in the Battle of the Trident and used undisguised violence to overthrow the Targaryen dynasty. Only then did he ascend the throne. In the rebellion of the Five Princes, every single one of them had a large army and a noble supporting them. In the end, there was only one factor that could decide who the Iron Throne belonged to: power. Power that was unparalleled. In the world of the Song of Ice and Fire, the only power that was recognized by both nobles and commoners was the king that soared in the skies, the dragons. Almost all the wise and mighty monarchs did one thing without exception, and that was to suppress the endless greed and desires of the nobles under them. A few minutes later, when Daenerys returned to the Imperial Conference Room again, the ministers who were still arguing immediately shut their mouths at the same time, their eyes revealing unconcealable fear and horror. She hadn't returned alone. She had brought Kulo Kelba and Zhang Qing with her. The formless energy field emanating from the divine dragon's body made even the knights who had undergone strict training find it difficult to breathe, not to mention those old fellows whose bodies had long been hollowed out by wine and women. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Everyone present could clearly hear their hearts beating faster and faster. Some couldn't take it anymore and even began to bleed from their noses and mouths. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. In the name of the Queen, I now declare that the Lannister family and its subordinates are officially stripped of all noble titles, lands, and assets. They have become traitors to the kingdom. There's only one outcome for them, and that is to be completely destroyed. Tell me, which of you agrees and which of you disagrees? Daenerys asked loudly from atop the dragon's back. The nobles, who were usually full of themselves, were now like little chicks who had their necks stuck. None of them dared to make a sound. They all lowered their heads and tried their best to show their most humble and submissive side. One had to know that in the civil war that broke out not long ago, those who had integrity and a sense of honor were basically all dead. The remaining ones were basically those who were good at changing sides and wouldn't jump out to seek their own deaths. Only the heavens knew if the gigantic dragon would open its mouth and spit out a scorching dragon breath in the next moment. Enjoying such an interesting scene, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but laugh. As he laughed, he said sarcastically, "Dear, did you see that? This was the true face of the nobles. To deal with them, what you need is not to reason with them, but to hold the sword in your hand tightly." If someone had stood out to object just now, what would I have done? Daenerys turned around and asked curiously. Very simple. Categorize that person and his family into the Lannister camp, then uproot them and kill them all, regardless of their gender, age, or age. Remember, nothing strengthens memories more than bloodshed and ensures that no noble dares to easily start a rebellion. In fact, your father, Aerys too, did well in this regard. Although his mental state was slightly abnormal, almost everyone feared him. The only regret was that he didn't have a dragon, so he was defeated by the usurper, Robert. Zhang Cheng deliberately pretended to be nonchalant as he explained. Without a doubt, he was taking the opportunity to instill his dark ideals in this queen, who had no experience in governance, and wanted to see if he could cultivate her into a qualified tyrant. That's right, a tyrant. A monarch who relied on great power and iron fists to rule the country. Damn it, who are you? How dare you bewitch his majesty? An old man who looked to be in his 70s or 80s finally couldn't help but stand out and berate loudly. He couldn't believe it. If the queen really did so, then she would be a great threat to all the nobles. No one would like a powerful king who held absolute power over life and death. This was also the reason why the monarchs in history who had accomplished great things were never rated highly. On the contrary, those mediocre people who did nothing and left the task of governing the country to their subordinates would often receive extremely high ratings in the end. Me? Zhang Cheng jumped down from the dragon's back and calmly walked up to the old man, replying meaningfully, "My name is Mason Aspirin, Lord of River Bend, Duke of High Court, and lawful husband of Queen Daenerys. Now tell me, how do you want to die, old man?" Mason, the old man's pupils suddenly contracted, and he immediately took a few steps back. "Dear Oberyn, can I trouble you with a small favor?" Zhang Cheng ignored the old man's panicked reaction and turned his gaze to the Red Viper. "Of course, it would be my honor." Oberyn placed a hand on his chest and bowed very solemnly. As one of the participants of the entire plan, he knew better than anyone else how terrifying this seemingly harmless young man was. He was even comparable to tens of thousands of well-equipped soldiers. Moreover, he was the representative of Dorne and King's Landing and knew which side he should take at this time. "Thank you. I'll trouble you to uproot this old man and his family. Early tomorrow morning, I want to see their corpses hung on the city walls." Zhang Cheng gave the order without hesitation. Kill one to warn the rest. Many times, the simpler and cruder the way to deal with things, the better the results. As for starting a rebellion, or playing tricks like poison or assassination, he didn't care at all. He even faintly hoped that someone would jump out and help him pass the time. At least until Valeni confirmed that there was no danger in this world and told him the location of the key to the fourth seal, he had to stay here obediently. "Understood. Please don't worry. There's no need to wait until tomorrow morning. Before the sun sets today, I can settle this matter." As soon as he finished speaking, Oberyn Martell suddenly pulled out his sword and pierced the old man's heart from behind. He then grabbed the old man's leg and dragged him out, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. Chapter 981. Some people said that power was the art of fighting for dominance. A smart king would make use of the conflicts and disagreements between his subjects to quietly gain control of power and then establish his supreme position in handling government affairs. However, it was a pity that intelligent rulers were often in the minority, especially when it came to decisions based on blood relations. Most of them could barely be considered mediocre at best. Under normal circumstances, seizing power was often accompanied by internal strife and bloodshed. Very few rulers could take back their power without shedding blood. At the very least, Daenerys Targaryen was incapable of accomplishing such a complicated plan that was beyond her capabilities. Therefore, Zhang Chang taught her how to use violence and intimidation to make those nobles who were not very obedient learn humility and obedience through a lesson. As the corpses of the finance minister and his entire family were hung on the city walls, the Imperial Council passed the proposal to send troops to attack the Lannister family that refused to submit to the rule of the King's Landing. In less than 2 days, an army of more than 50,000 was gathered and marched towards Casterly Rock. Along the way, the private armies of the nobles joined in. By the time they were 20 kilometers away from Casterly Rock, the number of troops under the Queen's command had reached a shocking 100,000. Among them were 15,000 cavalry and more than 800 knights, all clad in sturdy armor from head to toe. Of course, this wasn't what made the enemy despair the most. What made the vassals of the Lannister family feel the most despair was the gigantic figure that constantly circled in the sky, the unkillable mystic dragon Kulo Kelba. Look at those pitiful fellows. They've all fallen into panic and despair. I can guarantee that more than half of them will turn and flee the moment the battle begins. Oberyn put down the telescope he used for navigation and spoke with undisguised contempt. When Tywin was still alive, the Lannister family had been glorious. Not only did they have an army that could fight, they had also defeated almost all of their competitors and were only one step away from completely controlling the Iron Throne. But now, all that was left was a bunch of idiots clinging to the so-called pride and glory of their family. Of course, it was also possible that fear prevented them from surrendering. After all, half of the continent's inhabitants knew what Lannister had done to House Targaryen in order to curry favor with Robert. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was insane. God knows if they would be greeted with a massacre if they surrendered. Most of the time, the losers were unwilling to surrender even though they knew they had lost. This was the reason. When can we attack? Daenerys narrowed her eyes and looked into the distance, pretending to be cold. After trying for a few days, she gradually found that every time she put on a stern face, those officials who were originally unbridled would be particularly cautious, and there was a little more respect and fear in their eyes. Without a doubt, this was the change in power and dominance. Don't worry. Remember, this is not a war, but a public execution. Our goal is to let everyone see with their own eyes what the consequences of rebellion are. Therefore, killing and destroying are not the whole goal. The real goal is to firmly brand fear into the depths of everyone's heart. Zhang Cheng touched his chin and explained meaningfully. Oh, what are you going to do? Oberyn asked curiously. It's very simple. First, we'll create panic and make the citizens realize that Casterly Rock isn't as indestructible as they think. With that, Zhang Cheng raised his arm and shot a dazzling red light into the sky. The next second, the dragon that had been hovering in the sky suddenly swooped down, opening its bloody mouth and spewing a fatal dragon's breath along the city walls. Thousands of soldiers who had been waiting were burned to ashes just like that. Even the city walls made of hard rock melted into boiling lava. Fortunately, Kulo Kelba had no intention of continuing to attack the other walls and fortresses. After destroying one of the walls, it quickly climbed back up to a height of several hundred meters. It took less than 15 seconds to make the nobles and commoners of Casterly Rock understand that the city could not be defended. After a short silence, Daenerys' soldiers immediately burst into enthusiastic cheers. Some of them who were full of adrenaline even rode their war horses to the bottom of the city walls and roared, venting the excitement in their hearts. For an army, nothing could raise morale more than an easy victory. In addition, Casterly Rock was the home of the Lannister family, and its wealth far exceeded that of most towns. It was rumored that the treasury under the castle was filled with gold mined from the mines. In short, as long as they robbed it once, they would be able to find it for the rest of their lives. In Westeros, armies were no different from bandits. Many vicious and merciless fellows had even begun to think about massacring the entire city. While Casterly Rock was plunged into unprecedented panic and chaos, Valeni had already secretly left the happy lair that made him forget to return through a secret passage. He was still looking for information in the inns and bars of King's Landing. Whether it was the myths and legends of ancient times, the lost civilizations, or the rumors of supernatural powers all over the world, he would rather kill the wrong person than let them go. It took him about 2 or 3 days to sort out a notebook that wasn't too thick. A few of the things he had marked with a red pen were things that he thought were a threat to him. Kulo Kelba was at the top of the list. As for the rest, they included the already extinct Valyria, the Shadowlands where supernatural powers were most active, the otherworldly demons outside the Great Wall of the North, the Children of the Forest who had disappeared from sight, the Lord of Light, and so on. It had to be said that Valeni's ability to survive until now was mostly due to his cautiousness. He wasn't a fool and knew not to be fooled by superficial appearances. He directly searched for the most essential parts of the world. But in general, he was quite satisfied with this place called Westeros. Even if a terrible disaster were to happen, he was confident that he could survive it. In any case, he hadn't found any signs of the world's destruction from the fragments of the future. However, Valeni didn't know that the future world he saw didn't include the rapidly growing undead army in the north. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 982. The Northern Territory. Deviants? Perhaps I should go and confirm it myself. Valeni muttered to himself as he stared at the notes in his hands. Like Zhang Chung, he was also someone who lacked a sense of security. The only difference between the two was that when Zhang Chung felt threatened, he would fall into a state of mind that was a mixture of rationality and madness. However, Valeni only wanted to escape from danger and find a safe place to hide. After all, his ability was to predict what might happen in the future from the chaotic fragments, and it was the nature of most humans to avoid misfortune and seek good luck. Thus, running away was an inevitable choice. Many Chicken Soup for the Soul repeatedly emphasized that one must face difficulties head-on. Otherwise, once one ran away, they were destined to be mediocre for the rest of their lives. However, looking at the history of mankind, there were very few people who dared to face difficulties and dangers head-on. Most people subconsciously chose to run away. However, Zhang Chung was the exact opposite. He hated fatalism and never thought that the future was fixed. He was even unwilling to learn any prophecy magic and firmly believed that his power could change the future. The difference in personality and thinking between the two caused them to have completely different styles of doing things. Just as Valeni hired a carriage and left King's Landing and headed north along the King's Road, intending to take a look at the Great Wall and ask about deviants, Casterly Rock finally welcomed the prelude to destruction. Early in the morning, hundreds of catapults hurled canisters filled with wildfire into the city in a parabola. In the blink of an eye, a large expanse of green flames rose into the sky and quickly spread among the wooden houses. In a short 10 minutes, half of the city was engulfed in a sea of fire. Screams and cries of despair rang out incessantly. There is no need to ask to know that these dangerous things were found in King's Landing. They were originally terrifying weapons that the Targaryen family commissioned alchemists to secretly research after they lost their dragon. They were used to intimidate the nobles who harbored evil intentions. Today, they finally came in handy. Attack! Attack! Archers! Shoot! Accompanied by the hoarse shouts of the noble officers, approximately 6,000 infantrymen began to approach the eastern wall that had already been melted by the dragon flames. In front of them were less than 3,500 soldiers armed with shields and spears. They were stationed in place, intending to use their bodies to make a final stand. There are no surprises. After enduring a short baptism of arrows, the soldiers on both sides immediately entered a bitter melee. Everyone knew that hand-to-hand combat was an anaerobic exercise that consumed a lot of energy. Even after a long period of training, one would not be able to persist for too long. Generally speaking, an army with a sound system would usually adopt a rotation system, which was to let the veterans in the first row fight for a period of time, then retreat and let the soldiers at the back take over to get a short rest and recovery time. Due to differences in race and level of training, this time varied from 3 to 5 minutes. This also meant that a person could only fight with a weapon for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once 5 minutes passed, the person would immediately fall into a state of fatigue. What kind of one-on-one duel would last for 180 rounds? Those were all lies. A true expert could often decide life and death in an instant. There was not the slightest bit of fancy moves, skills, or movements. Unfortunately, the armies of Westeros were still in a state of ignorance and chaos. Most of the soldiers were either the private armies of nobles or hired mercenaries. Once they entered a state of chaos, tactical commands were completely ineffective. It all depended on individual performance. Relying on their advantage in numbers, Daenerys's troops quickly broke the enemy's formation, cutting them apart and encircling them before annihilating them bit by bit. When the death toll on both sides reached 1,000, the soldiers loyal to Lannister finally broke down. They threw away their weapons and turned to run, even though green wildfire was everywhere behind them. The remaining soldiers saw that their defeat was a foregone conclusion and immediately rushed in like a swarm of bees. While ferociously killing every enemy that was left behind, they unscrupulously kicked open houses, some robbed property, and some raped women. Looking at the hellish scene in front of him, Oberyn took a deep breath and sighed. They're finished. After today, Casterly Rock and Lannister will be history. But I have a question. How do you plan to deal with the West? You must know that without a powerful family to hold the fort, this land will be filled with chaos, slaughter, and death. Don't worry, I plan to promote at least 50 knights for barons and 2 viscount from the soldiers who have made contributions. These fellows promoted from the bottom of society are naturally loyal allies of the royal power. They will keep an eye on the West for Her Majesty. If anyone dares to cause trouble, what awaits them will be ruthless destruction and death. Zhang Chung replied nonchalantly. Although he understood that promoting commoners from the bottom to nobles meant greed and corruption. But history on Earth had proven many times that the only way to overthrow the monopoly of the nobles was to promote commoners and suppress this huge interest group from within. Wow, big move. I have to admit, although many people have called me a lunatic before, compared to you, I'm clearly not crazy enough. Promoting 50 knights for barons and 2 viscounts from the commoners at once, I can guarantee that this will attract countless protests and objections. Oberyn raised his eyebrows, his tone full of schadenfreude. What was a noble? A noble bloodline. To put it bluntly, it was a competition of ancestors. Your father, your grandfather, your grandfather's father, and your grandfather's grandfather, at least for 5 generations, must have a noble title, otherwise they will be ostracized by all the nobles. The most typical example was the Onion Knight Davos Seaworth. Although he was deeply trusted by Stannis, the old nobles had never truly acknowledged him, and even mocked him time and time again for his low birth. Protests? Objections? Zhang Chung slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a meaningful sneer. Do you think I care about this? No, dear Oberyn. I will use practical actions to prove that the so-called resistance of the nobles is as powerless as a teenage girl in front of a strong rogue. After saying this, Zhang Chung cast his gaze not far away, where Daenerys was frowning. The queen was clearly not used to such a brutal scene of massacres. Several times, she opened her mouth to order to stop the slaughter of commoners and plunder, but unfortunately, the current chaotic situation made her lose control of the army, and even the noble officer in charge of commanding could not be found. Chapter 983. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Zhang Cheng quietly came behind Daenerys and asked softly in a low voice. Anyone who was not blind could see that the young queen did not like war, especially this kind of war filled with cruelty, violence, robbery, and murder. Do we have to do this? I mean, completely destroy Casterly Rock. After all, the civilians are innocent. They should not pay the price for the mistakes made by the Lannister family. Daenerys frowned subconsciously, her eyes revealing undisguised disgust. Naive, Zhang Cheng sneered and explained, "Remember, my dear, no one in this world is innocent. Think about it carefully. Without the support of the citizens of Casterly Rock, would the remnants of the Lannister family have the courage to rely on this city, to refuse to swear allegiance to King's Landing? Don't forget, they have ruled this land for too long. Even many civilians subconsciously believe that the Lannisters are the ones they should be loyal to. So in order to announce to the world that the Lannisters are history, you must destroy the foundation they rely on for survival, which is Casterly Rock and the people who live in it. This has nothing to do with good or evil. It's just political considerations. In short, you can't let those hiding in the darkness have delusions and use blood, slaughter, and death to announce who is the supreme ruler of this country. But don't you think it's too cruel?" Daenerys sighed slightly. "Cruel?" Zhang Cheng shook his head without thinking. "No, I don't think it's cruel at all. On the contrary, it's because of your indecisiveness that this disaster happened today. If you had made up your mind earlier and used force to destroy the Lannister family, then Casterly Rock could have been preserved intact. So let go of your ridiculous pity. As a monarch, only by abandoning hypocritical kindness and maintaining absolute coldness and rationality can you rule a country well." "You mean all of this is my fault?" Daenerys subconsciously clenched her fists, her expression a little agitated. "Is it not? Please tell me, what is the responsibility of a king? Have you fulfilled your duty? No, you didn't. You were just like an ignorant little girl, letting those nobles play with you. If it weren't for me, you might have already become a plaything for those male nobles and a breeding tool. Do not always think that House Targaryen is something to be proud of. You and your ancestors are but insignificant survivors of the ancient Valyrian civilization." Zhang Cheng did not give the other party any face at all. He directly tore apart history and pointed at the weakest, most fearful, and most helpless place in Daenerys' heart: bloodline and surname. It was never something to be proud of, especially in this world where one's bloodline could not provide them with great power. It was best to always remember that one was just an insignificant mortal so that one could live better. In your eyes, I'm a stupid and conceited idiot, right? Daenerys was clearly infuriated by those words, and flames of anger shot out of her eyes. But in the end, for some reason, she held it in and returned to her tent. Her face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. Watching her figure gradually disappear into the distance, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but smile and sigh. What's that saying again? Oh, right. Politics makes women go away. Overly emotional thinking will never allow them to be qualified schemers and schemers. At the same time, far away from the Great Wall of Despair, Death Knight Shuma was leading his ever-growing undead army to attack the barbarian tribes they encountered along the way. Those with powerful souls were all transformed into banshees, death knights, and necromancers. Those with powerful bodies were transformed into skeletal soldiers, zombies, and stitched abominations. There were also many craftsmen who had been turned into living dead, working day and night to create the various tools and weapons needed by the army. This was because Shuma could feel that those creatures called deviant ghosts had already sensed his arrival and were planning to start a war to determine the control of the extreme north. "Sir, the meat grinder army has been formed. We need more corpses now." Fresh corpses, a withered necromancer reminded carefully. As one of the few undead who retained his memories from when he was alive, he had witnessed the terrifying scene of Shuma releasing his power without restraint. It was definitely not something that humans could contend against, so his tone was filled with fear. Don't think that the dead won't feel fear. In fact, all living beings with the ability to think independently would instinctively feel a strong sense of fear. The so-called undead that did not feel fear referred to the low-level undead that did not have the ability to think like cannon fodder. High-level undead like liches, death knights, banshees, necromancers, and so on still maintained a considerable degree of reverence for death itself. Oh, how many meat grinders do we have now? Shioma stared at him with his cold eyes. 300. But due to the lack of corpses, we can't maximize the power of the magic plague, the necromancer quickly answered. Very good. Don't worry about the corpses. We will soon have countless corpses. At this point, Shuma's stiff lips curled up slightly, and a chilling smile appeared on his face. He subconsciously drew the large sword on his back. This was because he could already see through the eyes of the death dragon that was constantly circling in the sky that a few strange-looking humanoid creatures were driving thousands of living corpses through the canyon not far ahead. At most half a day, the two sides would meet and engage in a fierce battle. The necromancer seemed to be frightened by this sinister smile, and hurriedly lowered his head humbly and flattered. As you wish, great undead king. Any obstacles in your way are destined to be mercilessly crushed. Tell you and your brothers to prepare to build a death array. I want those idiots to understand that their laughable necromancy magic is worthless in my eyes. Understood. Following Shuma's command, the huge war machine quickly moved. Relying on their bodies that did not need to rest and did not feel tired, the undead army arrived at the predetermined battlefield in a short 3 hours and started to build a battle line in full swing. As for the arrogant, deviant ghosts, they did not realize how terrifying the enemy they were facing this time. They still believed that they could use their absolute advantage in numbers to destroy all living beings. Chapter 984. There were no surprises. When the undead army formed the first line of defense, the deviant ghosts appeared on the snowy horizon. Of course, due to their relatively small numbers, the ones at the front were the living corpses that emitted a faint aura of death. Moreover, because the extreme north was frozen all year round, the flesh of the living corpses did not rot. At least, most of them still retained their appearance when they were alive. There were so many of them that one could not see the end of them. It was unknown whether there were tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of them. However, numbers were not the most important factor for both sides of the battle. What really decided the outcome of this battle was whether the Night King or Shioma had greater control over the dead. In less than 10 minutes, the swarm of living corpses rushed towards the undead army that was waiting in formation, unfolding a chaotic battle that the human world could never imagine. There was no formation. There was no need for command. There was also no so-called strategy. Some of them did not even have a decent weapon in their hands. They completely relied on their hands, teeth, and other primitive weapons to fight. Interesting. They seem to be life forms formed purely from energy. They use this energy to resurrect the dead and control them. Shioma touched his chin and muttered to himself in a low voice. Although he was not very good at complex thinking, he could still feel that extremely strange energy. It was as if life forms were distorted and presented in a completely opposite situation. Different from the pure energy of death, deviant ghosts were clearly a special life form that was artificially created. They did not even have the ability to reproduce themselves. They completely relied on energy transmission to change the situation of life and continuously strengthen their own race. Although it sounded very high and mighty, the weakness was also very obvious. The strength of a newly born deviant ghost was far inferior to those old deviant ghosts that had lived for God knows how many years. Only a single soul shock was needed to kill them all. My lord, when do we activate the death array? The necromancer moved closer and asked in a low voice. He did not even have the interest to take a look at the all-out battle that had erupted in front of him. All of his attention was focused on the magic ritual that was being conducted by the 6 necromancers at the back. Don't be anxious. Let's wait a little longer. It's best to let the enemy send in more troops. Also, get the meat grinder to start throwing large pieces of obsidian. I want to see how long the enemy commander can last. Shioma stroked his chin and gave the order without hesitation. The greatest advantage of commanding an undead army was that you didn't have to worry about the lack of soldiers. As long as you could win the battle, you could basically have as many cannon fodder as you wanted. This was especially true when you were fighting against living humans. As long as you weren't completely killed in an instant, you could rapidly increase your strength in a short period of time. Creak, 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 accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of wood rubbing against each other. A row of over 100 meat grinders was pushed to the front line. With the help of the zombie slave workers, the platinum-heavy rocks were placed into their designated positions, then thrown towards the enemy's rear in a parabola. Boom, 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 boom. Every piece of black stone that fell from the sky could smash a bunch of unlucky people to death. No matter if they were living corpses or deviant ghosts, none of them could escape death. Having been stationed near the ruins of the Valyrian civilization for so many years, Shioma had already unearthed countless treasures that this world would go crazy over. Large amounts of Valyrian steel weapons that had been melted down and reforged were just one of them, and these black stones were another. Obsidian, or dragon crystal, was without a doubt one of the deadliest nemeses of deviant ghosts. No matter if they were scratched or directly smashed, their flesh and bones would quickly melt and turn into a pool of cold liquid. Sensing that their weakness had been discovered by their opponent, the deviant ghosts suddenly became somewhat flustered. Nearly a third of them even retreated continuously, trying to escape the attack range of the meat grinders. At the same time, they controlled their living corpses to swarm forward and buy themselves some time. Looking at the dense swarm of cannon fodder, Shioma finally cracked a sinister smile. Without turning his head, he ordered, "What are you waiting for? Activate the death array." I can't wait to see the stunned expression on the enemy commander's face. Hee, I'm sure it will be very impressive. The necromancer smiled sinisterly and returned to his original position. He raised his hands high and began to loudly chant an incantation. In a short 10 seconds, a layer of gray fog suddenly enveloped the chaotic battlefield. The deviant ghosts that had been controlled by the death energy suddenly seemed to have been injected with stimulants. Their strength, speed, agility, and reaction speed were all greatly enhanced. On the other hand, the living corpses that were controlled by deviant ghosts began to twitch uncontrollably. After a short while, the blue pupils in their eyes lost their light and were replaced by the aura of despair of death. They turned around and attacked the deviant ghosts. Needless to say, this was the true function of the death array. It used negative energy to corrode the corpses, freeing them from the control of their original owners and allowing them to join the army of the undead. After all, compared to the primitive magic invented by the children of the forest, both the necromancy magic of Faerun and the psychic magic of Azeroth were far superior. Furthermore, deviant ghosts were not the creators of this energy. On the contrary, they were just a group of users who did not know anything. They did not understand the nature of the energy that supported their own survival, and they did not have enough people to conduct in-depth research. Shioma immediately jumped onto the back of the death dragon and soared into the sky while admiring the spectacular scene of the army of the undead swarming forward. He raised the chilling magic sword in his hand and went straight for the leader of the deviant ghosts, the Night Lord. The Night Lord, who had sensed the danger, roared and threw the sharp ice spear in his hand without hesitation. Unfortunately, not only did this attack not hit the target, but it was also caught by the death dragon and thrown back with a claw. Bang! With the terrifying power of gravity acceleration, an unlucky deviant ghost was pierced through the chest and nailed to the ground. Surrender or be destroyed. Choose. Shioma read the ultimatum loudly from above. He had a feeling that if these deviant ghosts joined his army of the undead, they would be able to reach a higher level and even create a new subspecies of the undead. However, the Night Lord did not intend to surrender. He jumped up and tried to launch another attack. However, before he could throw the ice spear for the second time, the death dragon swooped down and opened its mouth full of sharp teeth. With a crunch, the death dragon crushed the Night Lord's head and sucked out a silver, translucent soul from the shattered body and swallowed it with a look of enjoyment. Chapter 985. The Great Wall of Despair, the last barrier of human civilization in the north of Westeros. Although most people had already forgotten how this majestic and tall wall was built and what kind of enemy it was used to defend against, the vast majority of people had already forgotten. Even Night's Watch only saw it as a barrier against the barbarians north of the wall. In their eyes, the barbarians who often charged into villages to kill and pillage were the most dangerous enemies in this world of ice and snow. No one knew that while the humans were wasting their precious time on endless infighting, deep in the glacial valleys of the extreme north, a war that involved hundreds of thousands of people had just come to an end. The powerful undead had taken over the control of thousands of living corpses from the other ghosts and imprisoned those who were willing to surrender. The necromancers were in charge of the follow-up research. These unlucky souls didn't realize what kind of cruel and painful experiments awaited them. It was hard to say if they could even survive. After all, the necromancers weren't kind people. As long as they could get the results they wanted, they didn't care about the lives of the living corpses. My lord, according to the information provided by the deviants, the humans living in the north of the Great Wall of Despair are rapidly gathering, and there are many living giants among them. Do you think we should immediately launch an attack and wipe them all out? A Death Knight in black armor took the initiative to suggest. As one of the few high-ranking commanders of this undead army, who had retained their consciousness when they were alive, he could clearly feel the hatred for living beings in his heart. This wasn't a negative feeling caused by envy or jealousy, but an instinct that came from the depths of his soul. Pursue? No, this isn't something we should do. Why don't we let the surrendered other ghosts do it? Don't forget, before Master gives the order, our mission is to continuously strengthen ourselves and not expose ourselves to the humans. Shioma shook his head without thinking. You mean to let the other ghosts test the humans' reaction on our behalf? A trace of surprise appeared on the Death Knight's pale face. That's right. Release half of the other ghosts and give them 20,000 living corpses to chase after the barbarians to the edge of the Great Wall of Despair. We can use this time to properly digest the fruits of our victory. Remember, don't use the habits of the humans to measure the undead. We are messengers of death. Once we appear in front of the living, it means destruction. After saying that, Shioma fiercely stabbed the powerful demon sword into the ice, awakening all the frozen corpses that had been buried under the ice for who knew how many years. They began to methodically build war machines in preparation for an even larger-scale war. Unknowingly, half a month had passed. With the Lannister family completely removed from the circle of nobles and Casterly Rock destroyed, Daenerys finally led the army back to King's Landing and began to learn how to handle complicated government affairs personally under the guidance of Zhang Cheng. No one noticed that a stranger had quietly arrived in the cold north. Damn it, this damned place reminds me of the winter in northern Europe. Valeni grumbled as he pulled his cloak closer to the carriage. Even though he had mastered many miraculous abilities, he would not use them unless he had no other choice. As for the reason, it was extremely simple. He understood that he couldn't be considered to be strong, so not only would recklessly displaying his strength not bring him any benefits, it would instead easily bring him a fatal disaster. Maintaining a sense of humility in front of the strong and maintaining a sense of mystery in front of opponents of the same level was his way of survival. Fortunately, this torturous journey didn't last long. A group of knights in black armor and capes broke the silence. The man in the lead circled around the carriage before shouting at the top of his voice, "Who are you? Why are you approaching Dark Castle?" "Greetings, respected rangers of the Night's Watch. I'm from King's Landing, and I'm a curious traveler. I've heard of the famous Night Watchers guarding the Great Wall, and I'd like to see them with my own eyes." Warrant hurriedly jumped down from the carriage and bowed slightly with one hand on his chest. "Traveler, are you sure you're not a lunatic?" The knight in the lead raised an eyebrow, his eyes filled with undisguised mockery. The Night's Watch was no longer the glorious organization it was a long time ago. Almost all of the Night's Watch members were either nobles who couldn't survive or criminals who were sent here. Even so, there were less than 1,000 people left in the Night's Watch, and their supplies were pitifully low. They could almost be described as a beggar army. Of course not. I'm mentally sound. All right, I've also brought gifts for you heroes. A whole carriage of ham and sausages from King's Landing and 5,000 gold coins. In order to show his sincerity, Voleni directly lifted the carriage pulled by 2 horses, revealing the good stuff inside. The light emitted by the gold coins made a few people who had just been released from their criminal status restless. They even put their hands on the hilts of their swords and looked at each other crazily. The leader of the knights had undoubtedly noticed this. He immediately drew his sword and warned loudly, "All of you better behave yourselves, if you don't want to die." Without a doubt, he was quite a deterrent to these scum who used to be bandits. Just one sentence was enough to calm them down. Although some of them still had a strong sense of unwillingness in their eyes, they no longer dared to look directly at the gold coins in the carriage. After confirming that the alarm had been lifted, the knight in the lead finally let out a sigh of relief. He rode his horse to the side of the carriage, picked up a gold coin, put it in his mouth, and gently bit it. Then he laughed happily. "Ha ha, good heavens, it's a real gold coin. Well, I'm starting to believe what you said. Come, I'll take you back to Dark Castle. Commander Geo Mormont will be very happy that someone sent him so much money and meat at this time. Thank you very much. It's my greatest honor to receive the broadband of His Excellency the Commander." Voleni's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. He drove the carriage again and slowly followed the knight in the carriage towards the somewhat dilapidated castle not far away. After about 20 minutes, the group passed through the gate and entered what could barely be considered one of the safest places in the borderlands. Strictly speaking, Dark Castle was not a real castle. The east, west, and west sides of the castle were not protected by walls. Only the north side was protected by the Great Wall. The rest of the castle was made up of stone towers and wooden fortresses. Chapter 986. Hey, come out and see. Corin brought back a stranger. Oh my God, there's so much ham and sausages in the carriage. We're in for a treat tonight. Shut up, idiot. Put the gold coins back. Stay away from the carriage. Otherwise, I don't mind chopping off your hands. Could it be that the nobles in King's Landing finally remembered us, poor worms, and sent people to deliver urgently needed military funds and supplies? Due to their isolation from the outside world, the Night Watchers had endured unimaginable loneliness and pain for a long time. Therefore, they were particularly excited to see a stranger, especially one who brought urgently needed meat and money. As the commander-in-chief of Night's Watch, Geo Mormont heard the commotion outside and hurried out of the tower. He shouted, "Quiet! What happened?" "Your Excellency, I met a stranger when I was patrolling. He claimed to be a curious traveler and wanted to see our Night's Watch with his own eyes. He also brought a carriage full of ham, sausages, and 5,000 shiny gold coins." Corin dismounted and reported to the commander-in-chief in a low voice. "What? 5,000 gold coins?" Geo Mormont's eyes widened in disbelief. Not long ago, he sent people to King's Landing to ask for some military funds from the newly ascended queen, but who knew that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer would chase them away and give them less than 1,500 gold coins. But now, someone was willing to take out 5,000 gold coins at once. This was more generous than any king or duke. In order to confirm the authenticity of the news, the old man, who was as strong as a bear, quickly walked to the side of the carriage and personally ordered his men to count the gold coins piled up in the wooden chest. He then bent down and bowed deeply. "Thank you for your generous donation, stranger. On behalf of all the Night Watchers, I would like to express my utmost respect to you. You have helped us solve our urgent needs. Please don't be so polite, Commander-in-Chief. It's my honor to be able to contribute to Night's Watch." Voleni fully displayed his ability to speak the human language, and his eyes revealed a trace of sincerity. "Ha ha, I didn't expect that in this era there would still be people who respect us Night Watchers. Bo and Maxie, tell the kitchen to prepare a sumptuous dinner. We have to welcome our friend in the grandest way." Geo Mormont laughed and gave the order to the chief. After all, with the strong purchasing power of gold coins in the north, 5,000 gold coins was enough to sustain Night's Watch for a long time. Very quickly, under Warrant's superb acting skills, the soldiers of the Night Watch army gradually let down their guard. They raised their wine glasses and drank to their heart's content, eating the delicious ham and grilled sausages that they could not get to eat on a normal day. The rich aroma of meat reverberated in the noisy hall, and some people even sang at the top of their lungs. When the atmosphere of the banquet reached its climax, he finally could not help but take the initiative to ask, "Commander-in-Chief, I heard that there are many published stories in the north of the Great Wall. Among them, there's a monster called the Deviant Ghost." Deviant Ghost? Dio Mormont frowned subconsciously. Not only him, but several senior Night Watchers' expressions changed slightly. Jon Snow opened his mouth several times, wanting to say something, but in the end, he closed his mouth for some reason. For a moment, the surrounding air became a little heavy. After a full minute, the Commander-in-Chief took a deep breath and replied, "No, I've never seen any deviants. Those are horror stories used to scare children. Compared to the deviants, those savage barbarians are the real threat. For hundreds of years, they have attacked the Great Wall again and again, trying to seize our land. If you're interested, I can have someone take you outside the Great Wall." "Really? That's great." Voleni pretended to be excited, but in his heart, he was certain that the deviants were real and not some horror story used to scare children. But for some reason, those who knew the inside story were not willing to tell the truth. After confirming the real threat of the deviants, Voleni joined the Ranger Patrol early the next morning and began to leave the protection of the Great Wall, heading towards the endless ice field. For a week, he was unable to find any supernatural phenomenon. The biggest threat was just the hungry predators and a dozen barbarians who looked like they had not eaten for days. In this frozen land, food was so scarce that it was impossible to feed a large population. The cruel nature had activated the law of survival of the fittest, allowing life to kill each other and obtain the necessary resources for survival from each other. Of course, Voleni had seen this scene a long time ago in Northern Europe, so he did not find it strange. What was truly strange was that a savage named Cast seemed to be trying his best to hide something. He could feel that there was an extremely strange magical energy around the house. "Why are you interested in that old man?" Corin looked at the slightly old caster from the corner of his eye and asked. Voleni nodded with a serious expression. "Yes, I'm very interested. But it's not about incest with his daughter. It's about his strange attitude. Don't you find it strange? According to those women, all the baby boys would be sacrificed to the gods in the forest after they were born. But so far, no one has seen the bodies of those babies, not even the bloodstains or the bite marks of wild beasts. It's as if someone took them away, silently. So you're saying that the god he believes in is real?" Corin sneered and twitched his mouth. He might be an excellent scout and warrior, but he was definitely not a smart person who was good at using his brain. "No. What I'm saying is that maybe the god he believes in is the deviant ghost in the legends, and those baby boys who were sacrificed didn't die at all. They were taken away by the deviant ghost." Voleni revealed the scene he observed from the future. As a person who liked to keep secrets, he had never told anyone that his ability to predict the future was actually limited in many ways. One of them was that he had to obtain the corresponding trigger condition in advance. This condition could be something, or it could be the blood, energy, clothes, books, etc. Obviously, before encountering a real deviant ghost or touching the things they left behind, Voleni could not clearly see what they looked like where they were born and whether they would be a threat to the human world in the future. Chapter 987. King's Descent Red Keep, the military and political center of the Seven Kingdoms, as well as the place where the royal family lived. It got its name because it was completely made of light red stone. 7 huge iron-roofed drum towers were like resolute guards, guarding the descendants of Aegon the Conqueror at all times. Even if King's Descent fell, the castle was strong enough to withstand any kind of attack other than a dragon's. If the outer walls of King's Descent were the city's protective umbrella, then the Red Keep symbolized the royal family's final dignity. It gave them enough time to consider whether to commit suicide or surrender when they encountered an enemy they couldn't defeat. Of course, like all the sturdy fortifications in the world, the Red Keep had been breached several times, but not because of external problems, but because of internal problems. Sitting on an iron throne made of countless long swords, Daenerys was looking at the prime minister she had just replaced with a dignified expression. This short, middle-aged man carefully described the important things that had happened in the kingdom recently. He didn't dare to reveal even the slightest bit of his own subjective thoughts and ideas. The reason was simple. The previous prime minister who had been removed from his post had not only lost his monstrous power in an instant, but had also been severely reprimanded, to the point that his vassals no longer listened to his orders. Even the family behind him couldn't help but decline. The drawbacks of the feudal system were vividly displayed at this moment. Those seemingly stable pyramid-shaped power structures were in fact completely dependent on the prestige established by the high-ranking nobles over the years, as well as their personal emotions to maintain them. If these two things went wrong at the same time, it would immediately lead to the rapid expansion of the vassals' ambitions. They would begin to challenge the position of the lord, and finally complete the counterattack. Your Majesty, in summary, Peter Baelish has already lost control of the valley. Those nobles who have been loyal to House Aaron for generations have formed an alliance, intending to drive him out and then swear allegiance to King's descent once more. After saying a bunch of meaningless flattery, the Prime Minister finally concluded in a cadence. In short, House Lannister had been uprooted. Casterly Rock, with its long history, had been reduced to ruins in a single day. This greatly intimidated the nobles of the valley who thought they were strong enough, fearing that they would be treated as traitors and dealt with if they weren't careful. Oh, what did these nobles of the valley say to you? Daenerys didn't hurry to express her position. Instead, she expressionlessly asked the most important part. The Prime Minister hurriedly bowed and explained softly, "It's very simple. They want you to strip Peter Baelish of his title and rank and declare him a Lannister. In this way, the nobles of the valley would have an excuse to start a war. After all, with his outstanding political skills, Peter Baelish has long been secretly controlling the area. Only when he becomes a traitor will the knights loyal to House Aaron be forced to make a choice. Since the nobles of the valley have offered conditions, I believe that with Peter Baelish's intelligence and wisdom, he must have offered rather generous conditions as well, right?" Zhang Chung, who had been resting with his eyes closed beside the Iron Throne, suddenly opened his eyes and interjected meaningfully. "Yes, Your Grace." Peter Baelish had offered him the position of Duke of the area. In return, not only was he willing to swear loyalty to King's Landing, he also agreed to help the royal family keep the North in check and ensure that House Bolton will never be able to sit on the throne of the King of the North. The Prime Minister nodded slightly, deep reverence and fear in his eyes. It must be known that the mystic dragon, Kulo Kelba, who was seen as undefeatable by countless people, was as obedient as a well-trained hound under the control of this young man who looked to be in his early 20s. Moreover, the lords of the entire Riverbend area were unwavering in their support of his every decision. If necessary, he could raise an elite army of more than 100,000 men in a short period of time. Most importantly, Queen Daenerys Targaryen obeyed every word of her only legal husband. It could be said that within the Seven Kingdoms, there was no one else who could contend against her, be it in terms of politics, military, or power. Even Oberyn, the representative of the Dornish royal family with a long history, was one of her staunchest allies. He did not have the slightest intention of replacing her, nor did he show any signs of resistance. Zhang Chung narrowed his eyes as he sized up the somewhat slippery middle-aged man. He asked with a faint smile, "My dear Prime Minister, do you think that the royal family would benefit more from cooperating with the nobles of the valley, or Count Peter Baelish? I think that supporting the nobles of the valley is more in line with the royal family's interests. After all, they represent the orthodox power. Peter Baelish is nothing but a parvenu, a despicable person who relied on betrayal and betrayal to climb to a high position." This time, the Prime Minister was not as cautious as he usually was. He straightforwardly expressed his opinion. However, this was clearly not his opinion alone. It was the opinion of the majority of the nobles. It had to be said that even though Littlefinger prided himself on his intelligence, and even saw the chaotic situation in Westeros as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he still did not understand that he had never had the chance to climb to the Iron Throne. His bloodline and background were too low, and he had no military talent. He could neither win the war nor gain the trust of the soldiers. He could only hide in the dark and constantly scheme. Although it seemed that he had paid the least and gained the most, he did not know that he had become the target of public criticism. Almost none of the traditional nobles were willing to be his staunch ally. At the same time, no army was truly willing to fight for him. Interesting point of view. Let's end today's Imperial Conference here. Her Majesty the Queen will announce her decision at this time tomorrow. Zhang Cheng slightly raised the corner of his mouth and announced the adjournment of the meeting to the ministers. After these people had completely left, Daenerys could not help but ask, "Why? Do you disagree with the Prime Minister's point of view?" "No, of course not." Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. "You have to understand that in this matter, there is no difference between choosing the nobles of the valley and choosing Peter Baelish. The only key point is what kind of country you want to build. Do you want to let the great nobles build their fiefs in a private kingdoms like before, or do you want to strengthen the power of the royal family and directly or indirectly interfere with the Seven Kingdoms? If it's the former, then supporting the nobles of the valley and ensuring that the power structure in their fiefs does not fluctuate is definitely a wise choice. But if it's the latter, then you have to make good use of Peter Baelish as a chess piece and completely break the original power structure of the valley. Take advantage of the situation to plant your own trusted aides and ensure that their power does not fall into the hands of any party. Chapter 988. I don't understand what you mean. Is there a difference between these two ways of ruling a country? Daenerys subconsciously frowned. As she had been constantly wandering from place to place since she was a child, she had never received even the slightest bit of royal elite education. In addition, her horizons were limited, so she was completely unable to understand the huge difference between a feudal system and a centralized system of power. She also didn't understand how enormous and astonishing the potential that could erupt when power was highly centralized. How should I put it? Zhang Cheng rubbed his chin and organized his words a little. Then he casually explained, "Allowing the great nobles to have unrestricted power in their own territories means that they are actually independent kingdoms. The relationship between them and the royal family is not so much that of monarch and vassal, but rather that of collaborators. They share power and rule the entire country together. As a queen, the power in your hands is actually limited. You can't really intervene in the affairs of the various territories. Although on the surface, doing so can greatly reduce the cost and difficulty of ruling, it leads to an increase in the risk of rebellion. Do you remember how your father lost the throne? Robert Baratheon took the initiative to start a war for personal reasons. If he wasn't the Lord of Storm's End Castle and didn't have an army completely loyal to him, would this situation still have happened? So you think that I should weaken the power of the traditional great nobles like Martell and Aaron, so that they can't establish great prestige and power in their territories like before?" Daenerys was clearly not stupid. She immediately realized the crux of the problem. Zhang Cheng lightly nodded. "That's right. Although so far, from a political point of view, you haven't been able to take back all the power, but it's not a problem to give them some trouble. In particular, the entire Seven Kingdoms have just experienced a war. Famous families like Stark, Tyrell, Lannister, and Tully have all suffered heavy losses or have directly died out. It's a good opportunity to redistribute the benefits. You could promote some new nobles from the commoners and let them fight against the old nobles. You can act as an arbiter and ensure a weak balance between the two sides. Over time, they will slowly develop a reverence for the royal power. At the same time, they won't be able to casually raise an army to start a rebellion like before." "I see. I understand now. This is also why you eliminated the two nobles with the longest history and the greatest influence in Riverbend and promoted the leaders of your mercenaries to become new nobles." Daenerys suddenly had a look of realization on her face. After so many days of study, she gradually began to understand the nature of politics and royalty. She also understood how many interests were hidden behind many phenomena that she could not understand before. Yes, it was very effective, wasn't it? Look at Riverbend now. There isn't a single powerful family that can truly control the entire region. Everyone has to listen to me, or what awaits them is destruction. Zhang Cheng smiled as he revealed the true reason why he had wantonly slaughtered the traditional nobles in Riverbend. He could never allow his subordinates to grow too big and out of control. This was the essence of the game of rule and power. Unfortunately, the natives of Westeros, including Aegon the Conqueror, didn't understand this simple logic. They always wantonly infect nobles time and time again, handing over the ruling rights of a large region to a certain family for hereditary rule. They believed that they could rely on their vows and good personal relationships to ensure that their loyalty would last forever. As expected, the civil strife never stopped. Whether it was the battle for the right to the throne or the counterattack launched by the ministers after the decline of the royal family, they all showed how ridiculous this kind of childish politics was. Daenerys sat on the Iron Throne with a solemn expression for more than 10 minutes before she raised her head and said, "Divide the 7 kingdoms into smaller pieces of land and infect them to more nobles. Don't give any family the right to manage the region and have them swear allegiance to the king." This is the suggestion you want to express, right? Absolutely. I admit that this will greatly increase the pressure of management. So I also suggest that you set up an academy, just like the city of learning that has been turned into ruins. It will specially train the appropriate management talents for the royal family and give them the corresponding rights, but not the titles of nobles. This will make it a brand new political force that can compete with the nobles. This way, the royal family, the old nobles, and the new bureaucrats will form a stable and competitive power system. Before this system loses its balance, you will never have to worry about the power in your hands slipping away, Zhang Cheng said as he took a sip of the slightly sour wine. Without a doubt, training a young and beautiful queen from scratch was a very interesting thing. It even made him feel like he was playing a nurturing game. I understand now, Mason. Mason, you are indeed a genius. You can actually build a new ruling structure from scratch. But now, there's a more serious problem between us that needs to be resolved. With that, Daenerys stood up and walked forward with elegant steps. She whispered into Zhang Cheng's ear, "Dear, I think you should immediately fulfill your duties as a husband. As a queen, I need a healthy heir. Otherwise, all of this will be nothing more than a beautiful bubble." "Of course, Your Majesty, this is my honor." Zhang Cheng curled his lips slightly, put down the wine cup, and began to untie the other party's belt. Not long after, a seductive voice sounded from the tightly shut conference room. The maidservants of the King's Guard who were guarding the door exchanged glances with each other. They quickly pretended not to hear anything and continued to perform their duties. However, no one knew that Zhang Cheng had actually lost the ability to reproduce, even in this clone body. Fortunately, creating life wasn't a difficult task for a Titan who was proficient in magic. While Daenerys was immersed in her primitive instincts and desires, he quietly injected the seed of life into her body and quickly condensed it into a healthy embryo. Before long, this embryo would slowly grow into a healthy fetus and become the legal heir of Ironnet. At the same time, it would also be the only hero who could fight against the undead army in the extreme north in the future. In the script that had already been written, Zhang Cheng arranged a role for everyone and waited for Valeni to make up his mind to stay in this world. Chapter 989. The bitterly cold winds from the far north were a constant nightmare for the Night Watchers. Recently, many people had noticed an incredible phenomenon. The days were getting shorter and shorter, while the nights were getting longer and longer. The surrounding temperature was also getting lower and lower by the day. It was as if everything was indicating that the long summer was about to end and the dreadful winter was about to arrive. The seasons in the Song of Ice and Fire were different from the seasons on Earth, which were divided by 3 months. The seasons in the Song of Ice and Fire were different. The seasons here usually lasted for a long time, especially after the long summer ended. It was often followed by 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 years of winter. During this process, the food supply would be severely reduced due to the low temperature and lack of light. Many civilians would starve or freeze to death due to lack of food, clothing, and fuel. To the people of Westeros, especially the Northerners, winter was like a white god of death. It was not as beautiful as described by poets, and every time it appeared, it would be accompanied by a terrible disaster. However, as an outsider, Valeni was not as worried about the arrival of winter as the other Night Watchers. Instead, he focused all his attention on finding traces of other ghosts. This was because he understood that as he wasted more time in this world, there were fewer and fewer choices left. Although he still had some information that a certain someone urgently needed, he did not dare to use it as a bargaining chip. Unfortunately, this poor guy didn't realize that he was already on Zhang Cheng's blacklist from the moment he proposed the terms of exchange. Damn it. I hate this damn weather. These white snowflakes have been falling since 2 days ago, and I don't know when they'll stop. A young Night Watcher gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice while trudging through the knee-deep snow. Stop complaining. If I were you, I'd save my energy. Try to get back to Dark Castle before it gets dark. Who knows what will happen if we don't? Another Night Watcher spat out a mouthful of hot air. The terrifyingly low temperature had caused frostbite to appear on the faces of the patrol members. Their beards and eyebrows were covered in white frost. In such a terrifyingly low temperature, not to mention eating and drinking, even excreting could only be done in the pants. Otherwise, once the pants were taken off, a person could freeze to death in the blink of an eye. Warrant took a deep breath as he watched the clumsy movements of the Night Watchers. He carefully hid behind a huge rock wall and didn't follow the Night Watchers, because his ability could already clearly sense that danger was quietly approaching. Among them, the Night Watcher at the front was emitting a thick death aura that was about to materialize. Under such circumstances, unless a god descended, it was impossible to change his fate of imminent death. Just as the ignorant young man was about to turn around and say something to his companions, hundreds of figures suddenly emerged from the canyon ahead. Due to the heavy snow, visibility was not very high, so he could not see the faces of these people for the time being. However, according to the experience of the Night Watchers, other than the barbarians, it was impossible for a large number of residents of the Seven Kingdoms to appear north of the Great Wall. Therefore, without saying a word, they immediately drew their swords and shouted, "Stop! Don't get any closer! We are the Night Watchers. If you don't want to die, back off immediately." Silence. Complete silence. Apparently, the other party had no intention of responding at all. They only swayed their bodies and moved forward slowly, not caring about the warning at all. Damn it. Looks like we are in trouble. Matt, quickly get on the horse and report back. The leader shouted at the young man, who was complaining nonstop. However, before the latter could get on the horse, a spear completely made of ice pierced through the air and pierced through the poor guy's chest, nailing him to the ground. The location of the spear was very accurate. It pierced through one of the most important organs in the human body, the heart. No, Matt has been killed. The older Night Watcher glanced at the corpse and immediately shouted in panic. If it were not for the rule of the Night Watchers that anyone who escaped from a battle would be executed without exception, he would definitely climb onto his horse and flee back to the land of the Seven Kingdoms. Even being a free bandit was better than being killed. Get ready for battle. There are no cowards in Night's Watch. Even if we die, we have to bring a few barbarians with us. Noticing that the enemy had silently surrounded his patrol team, the leader immediately gave the order to fight to the death without hesitation. After hundreds of years of vendetta, Night's Watch and the barbarians outside the Great Wall were like fire and water. There was nothing to talk about. Under normal circumstances, unless one party was completely annihilated in the wild, there would be no stopping. However, the leader soon realized that he had made a mistake. An unimaginably huge mistake. What he encountered were not savages at all, but a group of dead corpses. Some of them had been exposed to the extreme cold for a long time, and their skin was gray and pale. Their eyes even flashed with a bone-piercing blue light. Who can tell me what the hell is this? Ah, monster. A monster that came back from the dead. Run. There is no way we can defeat such a monster. In just a few seconds, the pitiful night watcher fell into a state of despair. The courage to fight to the death that had been built up with great difficulty disappeared in an instant. They ran in all directions without looking back. They might be willing to fight the barbarians who also had bodies of flesh and blood, but they would never fight the undead that they could not understand. Perhaps it was due to superstition, or perhaps there were too many horror stories about monsters in the northern region. In short, the undead were monsters that could make ordinary people tremble in fear, even if they were not much stronger than humans. Thud, thud, accompanied by the rhythmic sound of hooves. A group of deviant ghosts riding death horses finally rushed out and caught up with the night watchers who had lost their courage to fight. With ice arrows flashing in white coldness, they beheaded the night watchers. Dazzling red blood spurted out more than a meter high on the spot. Then, with the inertia, the night watchers ran forward for a few more steps before they fell into the snow with a bang. Cold, ruthless. Chapter 990. Oh, so these are the deviants of the legends. Voleni, who was hiding behind a large rock wall, carefully observed these tall humanoid creatures that exuded strange energy. Even though he had enough power to kill them all, he had no intention of doing so. Instead, he stayed where he was and patiently waited for them to leave. Because through this close contact, he could already see the fragments of the future. He understood that although the deviant ghosts and the living corpses under their control could cause shocking casualties to the other kingdoms, it was not enough to shake the absolute dominance of the human race on this land. Since they didn't pose too much of a threat, Voleni naturally didn't have to worry about his safety. He had already made up his mind to stay in this medieval world and live out the rest of his life comfortably. He didn't realize at all that in the coldest place in the far north, a group of undead had built an ice fortress by relying on the fact that they weren't afraid of fatigue and didn't need to rest. Millions of corpses sleeping under the ice were awakened by the powerful magic sword and joined the ranks of the undead army. Among them, there were more than tens of thousands of transformed giant corpses, which was enough to make any country in the world feel despair. What was even more terrifying was that Death Knight Shuma didn't have any intention of stopping. He continued to order his subordinates to build all kinds of war machines, including tens of thousands of meat grinders, skeletal puppets pieced together from countless unknown bones, and ice golems created from the fusion of 10,000 years of ice and magic. In short, as time passed, the undead army would become stronger and stronger, until it became an existence that all life in the world couldn't defeat, even if they united. Compared to this terrifying army, deviants and the corpses they controlled were as harmless as newborn babies. Of course, Zhang Cheng, who was secretly arranging all of this, didn't know that his subordinates were so capable. They had already completed their objectives in a short period of time and were ready to launch an all-out attack on the human world. However, now wasn't the best time for them to appear. At the very least, before the deviants' vanguard was completely destroyed, the undead army would obediently station themselves in the world of ice and snow and wait patiently for orders. According to the plan, they would launch an all-out attack on Westeros 10 years later, when the next winter arrived, breaking Voleni's dream of living peacefully for the rest of his life. "Darling, do you think I'll give birth to a boy or a girl?" Daenerys asked gently as she stroked her slightly protruding belly. Ever since she found out that she was pregnant again, she had fallen into an inexplicable state of excitement and ecstasy. She once had a child, but in the end, she did not survive to give birth to the child. Therefore, she poured all her feelings for the child into the 3 newly hatched dragon whelps. She regarded them as her own children and thought that she would never be able to give birth to any more offspring for the rest of her life. But now, this prophecy had been broken. She was pregnant again, and according to the scholar's observations, the fetus was unusually healthy. It would not be long before the Targaryen dynasty welcomed a legitimate heir. Zhang Cheng, who was standing barefoot on the balcony in a long robe and looking down at the city from above, answered without turning his head, "Of course it's a boy. Believe me, You will get the prince of your dreams, a king who can truly inherit the throne and lead the kingdom to glory." "Oh, is this a prophecy?" The young queen blinked with a smile. "No, I'm just stating the facts. Also, I have something to tell you. I'm afraid I'll have to leave again in a few days. This time, I'm afraid it will be an eternal farewell." Zhang Cheng turned around as he spoke, a deep light in his eyes. To ensure that this world would never be interfered with by external forces, Voleni would definitely request for the spatial coordinates to be completely destroyed when he completed the transaction. Once he left, he would no longer be able to pinpoint his location in the endless universe. Eternal farewell? Where are you going? Can't you wait until the child is born? Daenerys subconsciously frowned. Strictly speaking, the young queen was not a ruler with a lot of power and authority. She even enjoyed having someone by her side to help her deal with complicated government affairs, and was happy to share power with those close to her. If she could, she would rather have her lawful husband stay, just like he was now for all eternity. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. "Sorry, I can't answer. I've told you before that what I pursue is different from most people, so you and I are just passers-by in each other's lives. There's no need to be too attached to it. All right, let's end this topic here. Let's enjoy the last few days of happiness. What about Kulo Kelba? Will you take it with you?" Daenerys quickly asked the question she was most concerned about. She understood that the respect the nobles had for her was completely built on the dragon that was almost unkillable. If she lost the dragon, the situation would immediately become complicated. "Don't worry, I won't take Kulo Kelba away. Instead, I'll leave it behind. However, it's best that you don't have too much hope for it. Under my arrangements, it will slowly fade out of sight and become a dragon god in the ancient legends. Of course, I'll also leave you some dragon eggs to ensure that Targaryen remains the revered royal family." As soon as he finished speaking, a wooden box inlaid with silver patterns suddenly appeared on the table out of thin air. 6 specially modified dragon eggs of different colors were neatly placed inside. They would bump into each other from time to time and make slight noises. Anyone with a little experience would know that this was a sign that the hatchlings had fully matured. In a few days at most, they would break out of their shells and become prehistoric beasts that stood at the top of the food chain. Moreover, as the Crimson Comet had just arrived on this planet, there was no need to worry about the magic energy in the air dissipating for a long time. "They're so beautiful." Daenerys carefully held up one of the dragon eggs, her eyes filled with endless memories and associations. A few years ago, after she married Drogo, she received 3 dragon eggs as a gift when she was pregnant. Regrettably, her husband became a walking corpse at a crucial moment, and her children were miscarried before they could be born. The hatchlings were taken away by the enemy, and all of them died in the war. But now, she finally had the chance to make up for all this pain and regret. Zhang Cheng didn't care about Daenerys' complicated emotions. His eyes had already passed through the obstruction of space and could clearly see Voleni in a carriage, rushing back from the north along the kingdom's main road. During the journey, he didn't forget to hide in the carriage with a few young ladies he had hired, indulging his inner desires to the fullest. Chapter 991. As the journey from Voleni to King's Landing became shorter and shorter, Zhang Cheng finally welcomed a special guest on a special day. He was none other than the teacher who had personally taught Zhang Cheng how to play games of power, Littlefinger Peter Baelish. However, unlike the last time they met, this upstart noble, who had a prominent noble title and was conferred with the title of Herrenberg, no longer had the witty, and humorous look on his face. Instead, it was replaced by undisguised fatigue. It was obvious that the battle with the traditional nobles of the valley had exhausted almost all of his energy and effort. But unfortunately, he did not get the return he wanted for all this effort. Just controlling the Eyrie exhausted him mentally and physically. Moreover, ever since the Targaryen family's orphan regained the throne and eliminated the traitors of Lannister, even the families that had previously obeyed him started to keep their distance from him openly and secretly, afraid that they would be labeled as traitors if they were not careful. Helpless, This most powerful schemer in Westeros finally suppressed his unrealistic desires and knelt down to submit, offering everything he could. As for his motive, it was naturally to protect the position he had obtained with great difficulty, as well as the control over the Arryn family. Looking at this short man who was showing signs of age, Zhang Chung smiled faintly and poured a glass of wine for him. He then greeted him with a smile. "Long time no see, my dear Baelish. How have you been recently? I heard that the Eyrie is a castle built on top of a mountain. There are strong winds blowing all year round, and it is easy to get arthritis. I hope there are no problems with your waist and legs. Thank you for your concern. I feel pretty good. At least I don't have any aches or pains in my back or leg for the time being." Littlefinger had his usual hypocritical smile and bowed slightly with one hand on his chest. "Is that so? Why did I hear that the cause of Lady Lisa Tully's death was very strange? There are rumors that she was pushed to her death by someone from high place." Zhang Chung teased meaningfully. A noblewoman who was still in the prime of her life would casually fall from a high place? What a joke. Not to mention the knights and bodyguards who were always by her side. Even her personal maids would not make such a mistake. Otherwise, what awaited them would be an extremely terrifying punishment. Not to mention the traditional nobles of the valley who were highly suspicious of this. The nobles of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms would not believe this story either. "No, you must have believed some rumors. Lisa Tully did fall to her death from a high place. You should know that ever since Duke John's mysterious death as Prime Minister, she has become abnormally neurotic. She can't be reasoned with. It's not surprising that she would do some outrageous things." Peter Baelish carefully explained himself. He was SSSS. 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 Even though it sounded ridiculous, he used to think too highly of himself, thinking that he and Varys were the only true chess players in the Seven Kingdoms. Now, he was reduced to being someone else's pawn, and the decision was not even in his own hands. But the cruelest and most interesting part of fate was often this kind of fall from a high place to a low place. "Oh, is that so?" Zhang Chung stared into Baelish's eyes with a smile that was not a smile. He suddenly changed the topic after a full minute. "Then let's talk about it. What's so important that you've come to find me for today? I hope you can persuade the Queen to support me in gaining a foothold in the valley and replacing House Arryn bit by bit. I believe it's not hard for you to see that Luce Bolton is an ambitious guy. He definitely won't be willing to stay in the barren Northern Territory forever. I can help Her Majesty keep the Northern Territory in check, and even make Bolton run for his life." Baelish calmly stated his condition. The reason he returned to King's Landing alone was because he had no other choice. Not long ago, he received news that the traditional nobles of the valley had joined forces and were preparing to form an allied army to attack the Eyrie and eliminate him, the arrogant vassal who was trying to control Duke Arryn. Even though the Eyrie was famous for being easy to defend and hard to attack, even the strongest fortress needed soldiers to guard it. And soldiers needed to eat, drink, and defecate. Only God knew if the enemy decided to besiege him for a long time. Would the bribed knights and soldiers start a rebellion and hand him, the main culprit, over in exchange for the enemy's forgiveness? Military. It would always be Peter Baelish's greatest weakness. He had never been able to lead an army to victory in a war. No noble or army would be willing to offer their loyalty, blood, and life to such a person. They would definitely not be willing to die for his ambitions. Keep the Northern Territory in check. Are you talking about using that stupid and pitiful Lady Sansa Stark? Zhang Chung asked with a sneer. If he remembered correctly, that girl who had inherited her mother's beauty and figure seemed to have followed Littlefinger to the valley. He wondered if she had turned from a young girl to a young married woman. As someone who had a deep understanding of desire, he would never overestimate the possessiveness of an ambitious man, especially one who had once pursued Sansa's mother. Baelish grinned and replied proudly instead of being ashamed. Of course. Think about it. If Sansa marries House Arryn, then won't those nobles who have no choice but to submit to Bolton develop some thoughts and ideas they shouldn't have? After all, the Stark name is already deeply ingrained in the hearts of everyone in the Northern Territory. As long as a Stark is still alive, Bolton will never be able to sit firmly on the throne. Ha ha! I have to admit, your shamelessness is beyond my imagination. If nothing unexpected happens, after Sansa marries Duke Aeron, it won't be long before she becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child with half your bloodline. Then, the poor little Duke will be like his mother. He will either fall to his death from a high place or suddenly die of illness. In the end, the child with your bloodline will become the new Duke Aeron, and at the same time, possess the bloodline and inheritance of House Stark. A perfect plan. You even got a replacement for your first love when you were young. Zhang Chung laughed as he mercilessly exposed Littlefinger's trick. How could he be so daring as to make a cuckold out of a boy who was in his early teens and had no sexual ability due to a long illness? Moreover, Sansa Stark was no longer the beautiful doll that was at the mercy of others in King's Landing. She was a wolf cub that had disguised herself as a harmless sheep and could launch a surprise attack at any time. Chapter 992. Isn't this the result you want? Completely messing up the distribution of power in the valley and giving the royal family a chance to meddle in its internal affairs. Moreover, with this condition, you can also ensure my loyalty. If I choose to betray you one day, you can expose this matter and make me and my heirs lose their rightful inheritance. Without a doubt, Peter Baelish had planned everything from the start. He had even considered Zhang Cheng's intentions. In his eyes, doing this would not only maximize his own benefits, but also give Leyland a handle that could be used against him. He would establish a preliminary relationship of trust and slowly become an ally. Just as he had said before, chaos was not an abyss. Chaos was a staircase that led to the upper echelons of society. But now, with Daenerys' rule stabilizing, there was no longer a staircase. Thus, he decisively gave up on his unrealistic ambitions and began to actively consolidate the advantages he had obtained. He also hoped that he wouldn't be kicked out. A handle. Zhang Chung raised his eyebrows with a half-smile. It had to be said that Littlefinger had a good grasp of psychology. He could tell at a glance that Leyland wasn't the kind of person who cared about bloodline and nobility. Otherwise, if he had said those words to another person, such as Queen Daenerys Targaryen, his only fate would have been to be publicly beheaded by the executioner. Peter Baelish nodded without hesitation. That's right, a handle. Once the plan succeeds, House Aeron and the Valley will become the most loyal hunting dogs of the royal family. They will tear apart any enemy who dares to offend the royal family. That sounds interesting, but there is a small problem. A secret is a secret because it is rarely known and will be slowly forgotten with the passage of time. Tell me, how can you guarantee that your descendants will still abide by this agreement in a few decades, a century or two? After all, even a noble like Lonnyx, who relied on deceit to rise to power, can slowly become a high and mighty noble in the eyes of others. That's why bloodline and surname have never been a problem. The real problem is that time can dilute everything. Zhang Chung casually pointed out this seemingly valuable but actually useless handle. To put it bluntly, it was a relationship of vassal and vassal. Once an alliance of interests was formed, even if someone exposed the problem with the ruler's bloodline, it would not cause too much of a blow to the ruler's reputation. At most, there would be a war of words, nothing more. And this time limit was usually within 3 generations. Once 3 generations had passed, those who were born later would no longer remember their previous friendship and would wholeheartedly support the new lord. Then do you think we shouldn't add anything? Peter Baelish's eyes flashed with a hint of gloom as he took the initiative to kick the ball back. Zhang Chung rubbed his chin and looked at the other party with great interest. Soon he smiled and suggested, "It's very simple. There is something that would not disappear with the passage of time. It was called a curse, and it was a curse that was passed down to the next generation through the bloodline. If one day you and your descendants betray your oath, then all of your descendants, starting from you, will suffer and die a miserable death. Now, are you still willing to make a deal with me?" Curse. Peter Baelish's expression changed drastically. He subconsciously dug his hands into his fists his entire body trembling uncontrollably. If it were anyone else, he would at most scoff at the word curse and not take it to heart. But what kind of person was Zhang Cheng? He was a powerhouse who could turn a magical dragon into his pet, a wizard who could summon hailstones to annihilate thousands of cavalrymen. If he said that there was a curse that could be passed down through the bloodline, then it would be better to believe it than not. Time passed by second. Beads of sweat quickly covered Littlefinger's forehead. His undergarments were completely soaked in sweat. It was clear that there was no point in lying at this time. He could either agree and let himself and his descendants be the dogs of House Targaryen forever, or take the risk of being exterminated and return to the valley to continue fighting the traditional nobles to the death. A difficult choice. In a short 10 minutes, Peter Baelish felt like an eternity. He finally let out a sigh of relief and knelt on one knee, speaking with an incomparably solemn tone. I hereby solemnly swear to the 7 gods that I am loyal to House Targaryen, including all of my descendants. I will never betray you. Very good. Now, the curse has taken effect. With that, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and lightly snapped his fingers. After the snap, Littlefinger suddenly discovered that tens of thousands of red marks had grown on his arms and neck. However, they quickly faded after a few seconds, as if nothing had happened. But for some reason, he felt that some inexplicable change had occurred in the depths of his body, or perhaps his soul. That's it. Peter Baelish forced himself to be calm as he asked. Zhang Cheng nodded meaningfully. Yes. The curse has already taken root in the depths of your bloodline and soul. Any act or thought of betrayal will bring misfortune and disaster. Trust me, you don't want to know what that feels like. Also, from now on, you're one of us. After we've dealt with the noble alliance in the valley, I will have Her Majesty give you more space to display your talents. When the time comes, the entire 7 kingdoms will become a hunting ground. Your mission is to display your strengths and continuously create chaos and conflict, slowly weakening the strength and influence of those great nobles. In the end, you will dismember them one by one. Really? Littlefinger's face was filled with unconcealable surprise. He originally thought that his intelligence and wisdom might no longer have any leeway to display, but he never expected that the other party would actually make such an exciting invitation. What was the most painful thing for a talented schemer and ambitious schemer? Of course, it was a powerful king and a relatively peaceful and stable political environment. But now, the highest ruler actually wanted him to disrupt the stable situation within the kingdom and once again incite war, chaos, and conflict. It was like a shark smelling blood or a dog smelling feces. Please do not doubt my sincerity. Her Majesty and I do not mind displaying the strengths of those with talent and fighting for more benefits for the royal family. Understood. Peter Baelish placed one hand on his chest and bowed before turning to leave the room and disappearing at the end of the corridor. Not long after he left, Daenerys walked out from behind the bookshelf and asked with a frown, "Do you really plan on using this ambitious fellow?" "Why not? In the eyes of a king, anyone with talent can be used. The only problem is how to use them. My suggestion is to let Peter Baelish do all the things that people hate for you. Then, when the nobles erupt in anger, you will personally execute him to appease the public and show the fairness and benevolence of the royal family. How about it? This plan is not bad, right?" Chapter 993. When Valeni's carriage finally arrived at King's Landing, Zhang Cheng knew that he had to say goodbye to this world. He didn't say goodbye to anyone, and just came to the predetermined location alone. While admiring the beautiful sunset by the seaside, he asked without looking back, "So, have you made your decision?" "Of course. This world suits me very well. I choose to stay." Valeni touched the short gray beard on his chin and gave a definite answer without hesitation. "In that case, let's complete the deal." As he spoke, Zhang Cheng quickly contacted the spatial coordinates used to locate the location, then took out a bottle of medicine that shone with a silver light, raised his head, and directly drank it. In the blink of an eye, his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth began to spurt out blood. It was obvious that this clone body would completely collapse and die in a minute or two. Voleni undoubtedly met his impending death and quickly said, "The fourth seal is in the depths of the desert more than 500 kilometers away from Cairo, the capital of Egypt. As for the key, it is the scepter of the god of death Anubis in your hand." "The pyramid of Osiris? I see." Before he took his last breath, Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a hint of understanding. Then he fell to the ground with a plop. His whole body melted quickly, turning into a pool of unknown liquid and disappearing into the sea with the waves. At the same time, far away in the ice and snow in the far north, a piece of paper suddenly appeared in the hands of the Death Knight Shuma. After reading the content, he immediately sneered and ordered the necromancer who was studying the structure of the deviant ghosts day and night, "Tell our vanguard, we can start the first round of attack on the human world now." The necromancer's eyes instantly emitted a bone-piercing chill. "Yes, now. Also, prepare more portraits. We want to let those humans know that if they don't hand over this guy, called Voleni, their world will never be peaceful." As soon as he finished speaking, Shilma jumped onto the dragon's back and soared into the sky. He flew across the endless snow in the northern lands, not bothering to hide his presence at all. He waved his terrifying magic sword and slaughtered every village and city he saw. He turned thousands of people into undead and crazily attacked the surrounding areas indiscriminately. The extent of his madness was far worse than the filial son of Azeroth, Arthas Menethil. When he arrived at King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, the city was already under martial law. The city walls were filled with huge ballistae that were painstakingly built by the scholars. They were waiting for an order to shoot this legendary demon down from the sky. "Ah, a grand welcome ceremony. I like it." A slight smile of sarcasm appeared on Shuma's stiff face. "Perhaps for the dragons in this world, but for the undead, even if they were pierced through, their wounds would automatically heal as long as they were pulled out. With the help of physical attacks, SSS. This was especially true for high temperature and extreme forms like positive energy, fire, and lightning. They were the easiest to cause irreparable wounds. Who are you? Why are you massacring civilians and turning them into monsters?" A fully armed King's Guard on the city walls asked loudly. It was obvious that he was asking questions for Daenerys and the ministers of the Imperial Conference. After all, from the moment he appeared until now, there was almost no communication. There was also no sense of reason at all. The only thing he did was slaughter. He crazily slaughtered every living person he saw. In the end, the cities and villages were reduced to ruins. The resurrected corpses wandered around like ghosts. All the spies who dared to approach were attacked without exception. Less than 1 in 10 managed to escape alive and report the situation. After the Targaryen dynasty unified the continent, there had never been a war that was so tragic. Everywhere they went, no life was spared. "My name is Shuma, the king of the undead, the commander of an army of millions of undead. Now, I'm here to inform you of something. Hand over a man called Voleni. Otherwise, my army and I will launch an attack and kill every single one of you." The Death Knight sat on the dragon's back and gave the ultimatum. Voleni. Daenerys, who was hiding behind the city walls, frowned subconsciously. She turned around and asked the ministers around her, "Does anyone know who this Voleni is?" "I don't." "Apologies, Your Majesty. I've never heard of him." "Me too." For a moment, these nobles shook their heads, indicating that they had never heard of this name. But before they could come to a conclusion, Shilma immediately took out a parchment with a magic image printed on it and threw it down from the air. "Take it. This is his portrait. I'll give you 1 year. If he's not delivered to me within a year, I'll take it as a sign of war. Trust me, with your laughable army, you won't even be able to last a month." After saying this, the death dragon immediately climbed into the sky and flew towards the north, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. There is no need to ask to know that such a huge move naturally couldn't be hidden from the residents of King's Descent City. In just a few short hours, Everyone knew that there was a terrifying death army to the north of the Great Wall of Despair. If they couldn't satisfy their conditions, all life in the entire world would be slaughtered. For survival. For survival. Nobles, commoners, mercenaries, and even those beggars who didn't have enough food to eat or clothes to cover their bodies were all frantically searching for Voleni. The Imperial Conference had even offered a huge reward of 10,000 gold royals. Looking at the people on the streets with green eyes, Voleni, who was hiding in the secret passage, couldn't help but shiver. He gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. Damn it. I knew it. I knew it. That fellow left so quickly. He definitely didn't have good intentions. As expected, he still has no intention of letting me go. This lunatic with a dark heart. Who does he think he is? Do you think I'm his dog? But regrettably, no matter how much he cursed, he couldn't change the terrible situation before him. The portrait Shuma left behind wasn't an ordinary hand-drawn one, but a magical one. No matter how he disguised himself, the person in the portrait would immediately change. Chapter 994. What did it feel like to be the public enemy? No matter where you went, whether you were eating, drinking, or sleeping, you had to be on high alert to prevent yourself from being caught by a swarm of people the next second. Needless to say, it was a disaster, and it made one feel extremely hopeless. How unfortunate. Voleni was experiencing such a life for himself. Even though most of the time, civilians holding wooden sticks in their hands posed no threat to him, the problem was that there were just too many pursuers. Once he started fighting with the first batch of pursuers, it wouldn't take long for thousands of people to swarm him. He wasn't good at fighting, nor was he good at spells of mass destruction. He also didn't have enough magical energy to continuously cast spells. On the contrary, he was good at avoiding danger. If he had to participate in a battle, Voleni would first predict the future and figure out the enemy's weakness. Then, after a long period of preparation and planning, he would finally launch a fatal attack at the right time. But the problem was that it wasn't just one or two people who were chasing after him, but the entire population of King's Landing. There was no way to predict when, who, and where would launch a surprise attack. So the only thing he could do was to escape. Escape with all his might. Escape from King's Landing and Westeros at the fastest speed possible. As the saying goes, money makes the world go round. After spending a huge sum of 200,000 gold coins, Voleni finally bribed a merchant from a free trade city-state. He boarded the merchant ship and quietly left the port under the cover of night, heading straight for Pinto's city. But before he could heave a sigh of relief, a few burly sailors recognized him and started a rebellion 2 days later. Not only did they kill their employer, but they also almost captured him. But regrettably, the sailors clearly didn't know who the enemy they were facing was. In the end, they were all dealt with cleanly in just a few moves. Smelling the thick scent of blood in the cabin, Voleni sighed helplessly and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "There really isn't a day of peace here. And how am I going to operate an ancient ship by myself?" After all, he was neither a sailor nor a navigator. He had no idea how to use the stars, tools, and maps of this world to determine the direction. Left with no other choice, they could only hang their sails and go with the flow, wandering on the boundless ocean. A day passed, a week passed, a month passed. As the ship's food and drink reserves began to run out, Voleni finally realized how bad his situation was. Because these days, not to mention land, not even a passing ship could be seen. It was very obvious that the ship had deviated from the relatively prosperous trade route. The most frightening thing was that if he couldn't find land before his supplies ran out, what awaited him was starvation and thirst. There was nothing more tragic than dying of hunger and thirst. In addition, the loneliness of not seeing a living person for an entire month was also tormenting his spirit. "I see. This is your revenge. You want me to die slowly in pain and despair. Ha 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 ha. You really are a monster that devours everything. A true lunatic with a dark heart." Voleni suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but laugh out loud, tears streaming down his cheeks as he laughed. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that a little thought of his would eventually become a fatal noose. such a strong desire for revenge, such an unbelievably dark personality. If he could choose again, he swore that he would never provoke the other party. He would obediently tell the other party everything he knew, and then make a small request when the other party was in a good mood. However, everyone knew that there was no medicine for regret in this world. There was no such thing as going back to the past or traveling to the future. Time was not continuous. It had a smallest unit, and every smallest unit existed independently. They developed parallel universes and spaces that were as complex as a three-dimensional network. The moment a decision was made, it was equivalent to choosing the next unit of time out of countless forks in the road. Just as Voleni lay on the deck in despair, waiting for death to descend, several ships flying the flag of Queers appeared on the surface of the sea. As everyone knew, Queers was an extremely large and wealthy city located southeast of Ursos. It was most famous for the fact that Daenerys Targaryen had once used her dragon flames to burn down the undying shrine of the male wizards. The influential Ancient Spice Guild had even publicly announced that they wanted to execute her for a period of time. "Hey, here, save me." Noticing the appearance of the ships, Voleni's hope for survival was instantly rekindled. He screamed at the top of his lungs as he waved the white shirt in his hands wildly. He was in a terrible state. Due to the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables for a long time, his gums were beginning to show signs of swelling, bleeding, and weakness in his limbs. At the same time, his face was extremely emaciated, his eyes sunken, and his lips cracked horribly. The ships flying the flag of Queers had undoubtedly discovered the merchant ship drifting on the sea and quickly approached. Not long after, a slightly plump merchant stepped onto the deck under the protection of a dozen fully armed sailors. He first looked around, then narrowed his eyes and asked, "Who are you? What happened on this ship? Where are the other crew members besides you?" We encountered a terrible shipwreck. Everyone except me is dead. If you don't mind, can you bring them back to land? In return, all the goods and gold coins on this ship belong to you." Voleni pretended to be heartbroken. "Of course. Roy, bring Mr. Way to our ship. Also, inform the kitchen to prepare some good food for him." The plump merchant quickly gave the order. In the blink of an eye, Voleni boarded another ship under the lead of a sailor. Once he was far away, an old man with white hair and a beard behind the plump merchant suddenly grinned and complimented, "Master, congratulations on unintentionally making a fortune. If I'm not wrong, that fellow should be the one Her Majesty Daenerys Targaryen has placed a bounty on. Haha, when one's luck comes, there's no stopping it. Tell your subordinates to keep a close eye on him. Don't let this worthless fat sheep escape. If we can bring him back to King's Landing and hand him over to the Dragon Queen, not only will we receive a huge bounty, but we might also receive a noble title and fief." The merchant's eyes flickered with ambition and desire. Voleni, who was in a state of hunger and fatigue, did not realize that he had just escaped the tiger's mouth and entered the wolf's den. Chapter 995. Conspiracy, deceit, betrayal. When a person's life was shrouded in these things, he was destined to have a tragic ending. The only difference was how long his spirit could endure before he gave up resisting and became an emotionless walking corpse, or completely collapsed and chose to commit suicide. Just as Voleni was struggling to get rid of his pursuers, Zhang Chung had already crossed the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, arriving alone in Egypt, which was covered with dense forests. Due to the impact of the asteroid, this originally dry and hot desert had now become an out-and-out tropical rainforest. At a glance, there were towering trees everywhere, as well as dense rivers and lakes. The most important thing was that some monsters from another world had settled down in this warm and humid jungle, and the remaining humans did not dare to approach it easily. Looking at the terrain and landforms that had completely changed, he could not help but sigh slightly and complain helplessly, "Damn it, what was that saying again? Oh, right, you can forgive a natural disaster, but you can't survive a self-inflicted disaster. If I had known that there was a seal here, I wouldn't have let one of the asteroids land nearby when I destroyed order and human civilization." But complaining was just complaining. He still continued to patrol the surroundings, trying to find places where magical energy or divine power gathered. There was no other way. This was the only seal he could confirm the location of so far. As long as this seal was opened, the sleeping gods would awaken, and it would only be a matter of time before the rest of the seal was unlocked. At the thought that it would not take long for him to end this boring trial, come into contact with and understand a more vast and boundless world, and uncover the secrets behind the multiverse, Zhang Cheng felt an inexplicable sense of excitement and anticipation. Moreover, with the help of the satellite positioning system, although the terrain and landforms had changed, the latitude and longitude coordinates on Earth had not changed. Relying on the comparison with the primitive map from hundreds of years ago, it took about 2 months to finally find the pyramid of Osiris buried under the soft sand in the depths of a huge canyon. Unlike ordinary pyramids, this pyramid was extraordinarily tall, 3 times larger than the legendary Great Pyramid of Giza. Moreover, it was not made of bricks, but pieces of bronze ingots of the same size. The surface of each piece was engraved with exquisite pictures, words, and symbols. It was hard to imagine that the primitive ancient Egyptians could build such a majestic building thousands of years before Christ. Disregarding everything else, just the bronze, which was seen as a strategic resource at the time, if melted down and made into weapons and armor, it would definitely be enough to arm a 1,000,000-strong army. Zhang Cheng walked to the entrance of the pyramid and placed the scepter of Anubis into the hands of a jackal statue. Rumble. It was accompanied by a deafening explosion. The tightly shut door of the tomb finally opened slowly, revealing a passage that had been sealed for thousands of years and emitted a strong aura of death and decay. Interesting. Let me see what the ancient Egyptian gods left behind to guard the seal. Zhang Cheng muttered to himself as he walked in. As the structure of the pyramid was not complicated, he soon saw the monster lying on the ground in the hall at the end of the passage. It had a lion-like body and a pair of yellow and white wings, but its face was no different from a normal human's. Yes, it was the famous Sphinx, the Sphinx. In most myths and legends, this magical creature that could speak human language liked to come up with riddles and let the other party guess the riddles. But in fact, it was a special life form that was between a demigod and a monster. According to the records in the divine tree, almost all Sphinx were the descendants of the eagle god of ancient Egypt. The power they had was far beyond the limits of what humans could imagine at that time. Other than the pharaohs, descendants of the sun god, no other mortal in the world could control the Sphinx. Obviously, the Sphinx felt the moist and warm wind brought by the flow of air. It slowly opened its eyes and woke up from its deep sleep, but it was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, it looked at the seemingly ordinary young man in front of it with interest. After a full minute, it sat up very humanely and greeted with a smile. "Hello, stranger. Tell me, how many years have passed outside? Are the pharaohs, descendants of the sun god, still ruling Egypt?" "Sorry, too much time has passed. It has been so long that the indigenous people who originally lived in the land of Egypt have almost died out. At least in terms of ideology, culture, and religious beliefs, they are not similar to the original Egyptians at all." Zhang Cheng gave a straightforward answer. In his opinion, after the war in ancient times, the gods on Earth chose to sleep, which was a bad move. These guys suddenly disappeared collectively, which directly led to the crazy infiltration of the forces of heaven and hell into the human world, especially the rise of monotheism in West Asia. It could be described as a disaster. Until today, after the catastrophe, there were still many stupid people who believed that there was an omnipotent creator in the world, and they put everything they had on this god, hoping to exchange cheap prayers for a chance to change their fate. What's more, in the name of God and religion, they burned, killed, and looted their own kind in the name of killing infidels. After death, they could go to heaven and enjoy a good life that could never be enjoyed in the human world. Compared to the strong, persevering, and creative ancients of the mythological era, the later humans were simply too weak. Even if they later created a relatively advanced technological civilization, they could not fundamentally eliminate the ignorance of most human beings in their race. What? The Egyptians disappeared? The Sphinx's eyes widened in surprise, showing a very human expression. Huh, why are you surprised? Don't forget, religion has always been a matter of the strong side, crushing the weak side. When you and the gods behind you decided to disappear from the sight of mortals, you should have expected today's results. Humans are fickle and extremely snobbish. They will only pray to those gods that can bring them benefits. Zhang Cheng explained with a sneer. The Sphinx nodded thoughtfully. You are right. Humans are indeed fickle. I'm a little curious now. What made you take such a huge risk to open the seal? Could it be that you don't know what kind of terrifying thing is sealed here? No, of course I know. In fact, including this one, I have opened 4 seals, enough to awaken the gods from their sleep. Dear Sphinx, times have changed. If you know what's good for you, you'd better get out of the way. Otherwise, I promise you will disappear from the world forever in the next second. Chapter 996. Oh, are you threatening me? The Sphinx was obviously smarter and more rational than the guardians they had met before. It did not launch a sudden attack, nor did it roar in anger. Instead, it showed a curious expression. Its eyes were like 2 bright stars in the darkness, making people fall into them and unable to extricate themselves. There was no doubt that this was an innate magical ability between charm and mind control. But it was a pity that such petty tricks didn't work on the Titans at all. To be exact, once the astral soul was completely awakened, any form of mind control or influence would not have any effect on the Titans. Even the pioneers released by the distortion of void, the ancient gods, and the dark Titan Sardras, could only influence and corrode the Titans before the astral soul was fully awakened. Zhang Cheng ignored the Sphinx's little trick and replied with a faint smile, If you think this is a threat, then it is a threat. Don't think that I'm joking. I guarantee that I have the power to put into action, power that is stronger than the gods. As soon as he finished speaking, his body suddenly expanded countless times, and he recovered from a human less than 2 meters tall to a Titan more than 30 meters tall. In particular, his body, which was shining like the starry sky, was constantly emitting a huge deterrent force that was difficult to describe with words. The Sphinx dared to swear that even in the era when the gods were active, there was no god who could have such an amazing aura. It was so oppressive that he could not breathe. Shock, trembling, fear. The monster's instinct that came from the other half of his bloodline quickly gained the upper hand. He hurriedly knelt on one knee, lowered his head, and begged in a trembling voice, Great existence, please forgive my ignorance and stupidity. I'm just a guard who is forced to carry out my duty. I'm not your real enemy. About this, of course I know. Otherwise, do you think you can still live until now? Zhang Cheng stretched out his left hand and lifted the Sphinx up like a kitten. I have no intention to be your enemy, but a powerful contract binds me, and I have to carry out my duty of guarding the seal. So please, don't worry, I know what to do. Before the Sphinx could finish speaking, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and threw him against the wall. Bang! With a muffled sound, the poor guy crashed through the wall and flew out of the pyramid of Osiris. The terrifying inertia caused him to plow a 100-meter-long trench on the ground. Fortunately, divine creatures had incredible vitality, so he did not die. He just fainted. Coming to the center of the pyramid, Zhang Cheng's lips curled up slightly, and he sighed softly. Finally, that day had finally arrived. The return of the gods. The secrets of the Creator. There was no hesitation. He used the most primitive and violent method to destroy the divine power that the Egyptian gods had imbued on it. Boom! A white beam of light shot up into the sky. The whole world. In less than 5 minutes, the world, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly burst out with astonishing divine power. Thunder, flames, and landslide hurricane. The gods, who had just awoken from their long slumber, were using different methods to display their earth-shattering power to mortals. Who opened the seal? No matter who it is, you will all suffer my wrath. Sinner, you have made a serious mistake. You must be punished. Feel the wrath of the gods. These ancient gods were so violent that they let their voices reverberate throughout the world. Some even descended from the sky and appeared in human gathering places, forcing them to offer food, wine, and women to please them. Gods, they were never as kind and beautiful as humans imagined them to be. On the contrary, in the eyes of the gods, human knowledge was a tool they used to fight each other, entertain themselves, and kill time. Some of the areas where the monotheistic religions were the most fervent had directly angered these ancient gods. Without saying a word, they began a massacre. Thousands of unlucky people sacrificed their precious lives for their faith. There was no talk. There was no negotiation. There was no negotiation. The ancient gods used their actions to tell the surviving people what a real God was like. What bullish asterisk T about God loving the world? There was no such thing. What the gods wanted was the reverence that humans had for them, the fear that came from the soul. Not only did Zhongcheng not have the slightest intention of stopping these gods from getting out of bed, but he also hid in the dark and observed with great interest. With overwhelming power, in less than a month's time, a brand new belief system was quickly established. In particular, the area around the Aegean Sea was once again under construction. Huge god statues and shrines were erected. Needless to say, Zhongcheng's actions had directly caused humans to become the slaves of the gods once again. In order to please the gods, they had to do whatever they could. Half a year after the gods returned, Sui Xiong came to the banquet of the Olympian gods. With a smile on his face, he said to the old man sitting on the main seat, "Good afternoon, son of Kronos, grandson of Uranus, direct descendant of the Titan god, the third king of gods, the master of thunder, Zeus. You are the madman who opened the seal?" The eyes of the old man called Zeus flashed with frightening electric light. He pushed away the flattering human woman beside him and stood up abruptly. As the supreme ruler of the entire divine system, he was not one of those half-baked gods. Not only had he seized the primordial power that belonged to the Titan god through the war with his father, but he had also surpassed his father. He could feel the enormous energy nurtured in the body of the young man in front of him. Madman? Ha ha! Zhongcheng laughed unscrupulously, shaking his head as he laughed. You are not the first person to describe me like this, and I believe you will not be the last. However, I'm not here to talk about this today. I want to ask you about the Creator. The Creator? You mean that woman? Zeus was stunned for a moment, but he soon realized the meaning of the Creator. That's right. Tell me where she came from and what she did. In exchange, I will allow you and your pantheon to submit to me. Zhongcheng raised his chin slightly with a cold and crazy smile on his face. He was so excited that he exuded a strong sense of aggression. He did not take the Olympian gods seriously at all. Chapter 997. How arrogant! Accompanied by a furious roar, a young man with long golden hair, clad in golden armor, and holding a sharp spear charged over. His eyes shone with a bloodthirsty light. Needless to say, he was the god of war, Ares, who was the most brainless of the Olympian gods and was driven by desire and instinct. But unfortunately, at the moment when the long spear was about to pierce him, Zhongcheng suddenly cast a destructive spell with shocking power at a speed that was almost indiscernible to the naked eye. The next second, boom, the poor god of war was instantly thrown into the air. Like a ragged doll that had been thrown away brutally, he rolled 30 to 40 meters away on the ground. Then, violet arcane bullets rained down like raindrops all over the sky. When everything was over, the god of war was severely injured. He tried to get up several times, but failed in the end. It was not unreasonable for warriors to be discriminated against and despised in most fantasy worlds. Looking at Ares, who was known as the embodiment of war, battle, military, and chaos in ancient Greece, and then thinking of Tempest, the god of war in Pharaon continent, who had done the same thing. Without exception, they all succumbed to their inner desire for blood, violence, and murder. They did not understand the value of creation at all. Their minds were filled with all kinds of impulses to destroy and destroy. It was inevitable that a large number of humans who believed in the god of war would behave similarly. Therefore, they would inevitably be ostracized by a mature civilization. This is your son? A complete idiot? Zhang Cheng asked with a half-smile. He could not believe that there were at least a dozen powerful gods with the bloodline of the Titan god present. But this idiot was the first to jump out. He did not even bother to test the waters and directly launched an attack. Such recklessness completely refreshed the intelligence of the gods. Zeus glanced at Ares from the corner of his eye and asked without changing his expression, "Are you sure you want to start a war with us now? Aren't you afraid of being ambushed by the other gods hiding in the dark?" Afraid? Why should I be afraid? No, dear God of gods, what I want to do is to announce to all the gods in the world that have woken up from their slumber, either you crawl down like a dog and be my servant, or you are torn into pieces and disappear forever. Whether it's you or that woman who calls herself the creator, all of you are my stepping stones. The moment the last word left his mouth, Zhang Cheng completely unleashed all of his powers as a titan. In less than a second, all the humans, buildings, animals, plants, mountains, lakes, rivers, and oceans in the entire Europe, North Africa, and Central Asia were turned into tiny particles that could barely be distinguished by the naked eye under the terrifying explosion of energy. When these flickering particles of light gradually dissipated, a huge giant tens of thousands of meters tall appeared in the orbit of Earth out of thin air. He was so huge that the Earth looked like a small toy that could be squashed with just a slight movement of his hand. Indeed, in the eyes of humans, a god who could create thunderbolts, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, and other large-scale natural disasters was already an invincible force. But now, facing the huge figure standing in outer space, the gods also sank into fear and despair. This was especially so for the main gods who had obtained the primordial power from the inside of the planet. They could clearly feel the overwhelming disparity in power. It was even more terrifying than the creator whom they had joined forces to sneak attack and seal, fight to the death, or abandon the dignity of a god and submit to the invincible power like they had in the beginning. Obviously, this was an extremely difficult choice. After the creator had been sealed, most of the gods had become accustomed to a high and mighty attitude. Asking them to lower their noble heads again was something that they absolutely could not accept in their hearts. Just as the gods were in a dilemma, Zhang Cheng slowly raised his right hand and gently tapped on the atmosphere that surrounded the surface of this azure planet. Boom! After a deafening loud noise, a thunderstorm that was completely indescribable with words swept through every corner of the world. Relying on the Titan's innate ability to control energy, he effortlessly stirred up the originally orderly energy in the air, causing it to become extremely violent and constantly release an astonishing destructive force. There was no need to ask to know that this was a sign of impatience. After a long period of waiting, Zhang Cheng gradually lost his good patience. He was extremely eager to find out the truth behind all of this, as well as the purpose of this unknown organization that had arranged all of this. A few hours passed in the blink of an eye. Although the gods were not as fragile as humans and had almost immediately suffered a devastating blow and could basically announce their withdrawal from the stage of Earth, they did not have it easy either. Finally, after careful consideration, Zeus, the king of Olympus, finally chose to kneel on the ground and beg loudly like a human praying to the gods, "Stop. Great existence. We are willing to submit to you and become your servants." Ha ha. No, this is not enough, because you have rejected me before. Therefore, you have to do something to prove your worth. Now, kill the nearest Egyptian gods for me. Use their lives to tell everyone that there is no third option. Surrender or die. Zhang Cheng laughed wildly as he gave the order. The supreme gods? They were just a bunch of garbage created by using the energy waste inside the planet. Although to some extent, they were indeed comparable to the slightly weaker Titan, their life essence was worlds apart. At the very least, the Titan was truly immortal. So far, Zhang Cheng did not know how to kill the Titan in the state of astral soul. However, these gods could be killed permanently as long as they were strong enough. There was no need to worry about resurrection. Undoubtedly, the Olympian gods did not have much choice. Soon, under the leadership of Zeus, the king of Olympus launched an attack on the nearby Egyptian gods. For a moment, the sea was turbulent and the sky was full of thunder. The spectacular scene of divine power overflowing everywhere was everywhere. In order to survive, every god brought out their trump cards and fought with all their might. When the war was coming to an end, only Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, and a few other third-generation titans were left in the Olympian pantheon. The rest had all perished together with the enemy. Among them, Apollo, the sun god, had died the most tragic death. The divine core in his body, which was as dazzling as the sun, had exploded. In contrast, the Egyptian gods were directly wiped out. There was not a single survivor. The war between gods was far more bloody and tragic than human imagination. Many gods' bodies fell to the ground and were devoured by the fish in the sea. Gradually, they evolved into life forms similar to half-man and half-fish. At the same time, they evolved to a certain degree of intelligence. Perhaps in tens of thousands of years, they would replace human beings and become the new intelligent species on the blue planet. Chapter 998. Very good. I'm very satisfied with your obedience. Now tell me, who is that woman who calls herself the creator? Did she really create everything in this world? Zhang Cheng asked condescendingly. After experiencing so many schemes, betrayals, and destruction, he finally stood at the end of his destiny and was about to uncover all the secrets hidden behind. Forcefully suppressing the anger and grief in his heart, Zeus took a deep breath and replied, I don't know her real name, but we all call her Chaos, which means chaos. In fact, she was indeed the one who awakened all the original gods from the chaos, bestowing them with powerful strength and endless lifespan, and assisting them in transforming the entire world. Wait, you said transforming, not creating? Zhang Cheng keenly grasped the key word. Obviously, there was a huge difference between the two. The latter was creating everything from nothing, while the former was transforming the original foundation. In terms of difficulty, they were not on the same level. The latter was many times more difficult than the former. Yes, transforming. Zeus nodded seriously. At that time, there were no humans on the surface. She joined forces with the original gods to create countless intelligent life forms, and humans were only one of them. Later, those gods discovered one of her schemes, and then joined forces to launch a rebellion to seal her and banish her forever. What kind of scheme? Zhang Cheng asked curiously. How could he not be curious? One must know that to artificial life forms, the creator was just like a parent. That kind of innate closeness was not something that could be erased by ordinary conflicts. Take Adam, for example. If one day he needed Adam to sacrifice himself, Adam would definitely do it without hesitation. But this one was good. She directly turned all her creations into a rebellion. Sorry, I don't know, and no one knows. Because all the original gods who went through that war were not willing to reveal any information to anyone, and they are all dead. Zeus gave a disappointing answer. Then what about the seal? You should still remember the location of the seal and how to open it, right? Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a terrifying cold light when he said this. As long as he heard half a word from Zeus, he would immediately kill him cruelly and then crush Earth, using the most primitive and violent method to open the seal. In any case, it would not be long before he left this place, so the life and death of Earth was no longer worth his concern. Of course I know. If you need it, I will be very happy to help. Zeus clenched his fists tightly, white lightning flashing in his eyes. Without a doubt, he desired to release the legendary creator, hiding at the side and watching two life forms that surpassed him fight each other, even if they perished together. Zhang Cheng stared at him with a playful look. After a full minute, he said meaningfully, Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and act. Break all the seals. Then I can leave this boring place. As you wish. Zeus turned into a golden thunderbolt and disappeared in the clouds. Not long after, the seals hidden in every corner of the world were broken one after another. A huge amount of energy began to gather together, slowly condensing into the shape of a woman. When the last one was broken, a naked and extremely beautiful woman finally walked out of the distorted void. She was still as elegant and charming as the last time they met, full of indescribable charm. "Long time no see. How have you been recently?" Zhang Cheng returned to his normal size, as if he was greeting an old friend instead of a mortal enemy. "Terrible. Did you know? The other you came to see me some time ago." His tone was like a doctor telling a patient that you have a terminal illness and are about to die. The woman rolled her eyes in annoyance. Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You mean old Chun?" "Yes. Who else could it be other than him? Maybe you don't know, but more than 2 million years ago, he was the one who brought me to this world, then abandoned me like trash and ordered me to transform the entire planet. I am a chess piece that was born for you, and a chess piece that will die for you. But I am not satisfied. I want to rebel against fate. I want to defeat you. Only then will they think that I am valuable." The more the woman spoke, the more agitated she became, and the crazier her expression became. In the end, she pounced on him like a madwoman, trying to use her slender fingers to tear apart the Titan's metal body that was harder than any material. "I smell jealousy and envy. But don't be in such a hurry to die. Before we fight, I want to know a little about your past. What do you think?" Zhang Cheng waved his arm lightly and pushed her away, still wearing a faint smile on his face. At this moment, he could clearly feel the strong connection between her body and the blue planet behind her. Obviously, this was a resonance caused by devouring the planet's core. Unless Earth was destroyed, she could continuously replenish her energy from the planet's core. When necessary, she could even use the planet's energy to recharge herself. "Understand?" "Oof. What do you want to understand?" A cold smile appeared on the woman's beautiful face. For some reason, her actions were so impatient, as if she was rushing to her death. "Like your name?" Zhang Qing narrowed his eyes and asked cautiously. "Arya. That's my name. Also, I can tell you that I come from another universe, an even more advanced universe. But my hometown was destroyed by you crazy lunatics." The woman's eyes revealed an unforgettable hatred. "Calm down. I'm not one of them for the time being. Please don't vent your anger on me." Sensing that the other party's emotions were starting to go out of control, Zhang Cheng immediately took 2 steps back and reminded her. The woman who called herself Arya curled her lips in disdain and said sarcastically, "It's all the same. Look at what you've done. How are you any different from them? To be exact, you're fiercer, more brutal, and more ruthless than them. You're practically a natural executioner and murderer. Only lunatics like you can start a superstring war that engulfs the entire multiverse." "What's a superstring war?" Zhang Cheng carefully continued to fish for information. He realized that the other party seemed to know a lot of secrets about the organization, so he wanted to obtain as much information as possible before taking action. "Enough nonsense. Let's end this. It's either you die or I die. If you win in the end, they'll naturally invite you to join them. If you lose, knowing too much is useless." Chapter 999. What did it look like when 2 monsters that used the core of the planet as their unit of energy fought each other? The answer was that every time they collided, there would be an explosion of light that was hundreds of thousands of times stronger than the only star in the solar system. The resulting energy impact would be like waves, constantly hitting the Earth, its satellites, and the Moon. The amazing destructive power it caused was far more terrifying than the previous asteroids that hit the ground and the thunderstorms that formed above the atmosphere. Some relatively fragile parts of the crust began to crack, and where several large plates met, a large amount of bright red magma spewed out. It was as if they had returned to the time when the Earth was just formed overnight. It was no different from the purgatory in the legends. This time, it was not just humans that began to go extinct on a large scale, but also countless animals and plants. Except for the invertebrates hidden in the deep sea, more than 90% of the species disappeared forever, and the whole planet went back hundreds of millions of years. As for the gods on the ground, they had already gone into hiding long ago, patiently waiting for the 2 huge figures in space to decide the winner. In fact, things had developed to this point. Zhangqing no longer cared about the life on Earth. He just wanted to defeat the opponent in front of him as soon as possible. But unfortunately, Arya was obviously not to be trifled with, and she had far more combat experience than him. There were several dangerous situations, but in the end, she managed to turn the situation around with some special techniques. At this moment, the two of them were not so much fighting, but rather, they were trying to wear each other down. Whoever gave up first would be the loser. Needless to say, Zhang Cheng had an overwhelming advantage in this regard. This was because he had not only swallowed the astral soul of Azeroth, but also swallowed something similar to the astral soul embryo in the Harry Potter world. So, in terms of total quantity, he was at least 2 levels higher than his opponent. Is that all you've got? Arya mocked as she used a speed that was almost indiscernible to the naked eye to construct hundreds of complex, mysterious patterns that mortals and even gods could not understand at all. In just a short millisecond, these patterns were transformed into the purest energy impact, each of which was completely different in type and strength. Obviously, there were advantages to doing this. First, it greatly reduced the energy consumption without reducing the power of the attack. Second, there was no way to defend with ordinary energy shields. After all shield-type magic usually relied on a stable fulcrum to construct a force field or protective layer. So when the attack was extremely dense and uneven, it was very easy to collapse in an instant. As an old woman who has lived for God knows how long and has been kept in captivity for a long time, I don't think you have the right to say such things. Zhangqing also freely expressed the abilities he had learned, summarized, and created over the years from various worlds. However, he didn't choose to use complicated and precise spells. Instead, he raised the power of each spell to the highest level, to the point where it could break through the defensive spells in an instant. Although this would consume a little more energy, the damage it would cause was just as terrifying. Sometimes, blindly pursuing superb skills and ignoring the most fundamental aspects of power was truly putting the cart before the horse. So-called skills were, in fact, alternative methods to further increase one's power when one's power stagnated or when one's close combat was slow. But now, Zhangqing did not need these alternatives at all. His existence meant infinite possibilities. Shut up. I will defeat you. Kill you. Those fellows will pay for what they've done. Arya's mental state clearly had a serious problem, and she immediately increased the frequency of her attacks. For a moment, the spear of light flickered in the deep space, and thousands of colorful energies collided. Due to the lack of air, sound could not be transmitted in space. So no matter how violent the explosion was, there was no sound at all. The conversation between the two was even completed through a mental connection. Kill me? With the pitiful amount of energy stored in your body? Or do you think I won't crush the mother planet behind me? No, my dear, you've never truly understood my thoughts, nor have you realized how much I'm willing to sacrifice those cherished emotions of ordinary people in order to achieve my goals. As the last word left his mouth, Zhangqing suddenly raised the supreme heavenly god power in his hand and viciously stabbed it down at the azure planet not far away. No! Arya instantly panicked and screamed like a madwoman. The attack just now had already pierced through Earth's equator, and a third of the energy extended from the planet's core in just a few seconds. Ha 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 ha! Eat more! Zhangqing laughed maniacally as he kicked away the woman who had rushed over to stop the supreme heavenly god power from absorbing the energy. Powerful. Invincible. Sensing the divine weapon in his hand becoming more and more powerful, he realized that he could finally take the final step in his plan. Seeing Earth wither and dry up bit by bit, and eventually lose all vitality, Arya's eyes finally revealed a look of despair. She opened her mouth and roared madly. Good. Very good. Even if I'm destined to die, I'll drag you down with me before I die. Come, let's perish together. Did you really think that I didn't make any preparations all these years? Instantly, the star at the core of the galaxy suddenly became active, and it continued to expand outward. The closest planet, Mercury, was quickly engulfed, and then it rapidly exploded. Its terrifying power was billions of times more terrifying than any weapon known to mankind. Damn it, are you crazy? Zhang Cheng's pupils contracted at the sight of this spectacular and terrifying scene. One had to realize that the expansion of the sun was no ordinary means. It would destroy most of the solar system, and it might even form a huge black hole. Crazy? No, I'm not crazy. I'll make all of you regret this. No one can fool me. A delighted expression appeared on Arya's face. She raised her chin like a proud princess, calmly preparing to welcome death. However, right at this moment, a mysterious power suddenly tore through space, and Old Chun, who was wrapped in a mecha, finally appeared. Chapter 1000. You did this. Old Chun stared at the expanding red star, his voice full of disbelief. It must be known that it was not easy for anyone to cause the expansion of a star from within and cause the destruction of a star system in advance. Not only did it require enough power, but it also required a lot of knowledge and hundreds of thousands of years of preparation. Zhang Cheng shook his head gently. No, it wasn't me. It was the woman who claimed to have been heartlessly abandoned by you. Oh, heartlessly abandoned? Don't make it sound like I'm a scumbag who cruelly abandoned a woman after toying with her body and feelings. Old Chin turned around and glanced at the indifferent Arya. I don't know if you've toyed with her feelings and body, but I'm sure she hates you very much. Zhang Cheng sneered. Facing the expanding sun, he didn't show the slightest bit of nervousness. Instead, his eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation. This was because in the history of the universe of Azeroth, life forms like Titans were only born inside planets. Therefore, according to the level of energy contained in each planet, there was a huge difference in the strength of Titans. However, for some reason, a star that was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more powerful than a planet had never given birth to a Titan. As a bold and crazy guy, Zhang Cheng wanted to try a long time ago to see if he could directly devour all the energy of a star through the method of energy conversion to transform himself from a planet-level Titan to a stellar-level Titan and evolve into a higher-level life form again. Clearly, the sun in its twilight years was not a bad choice. First of all, among the many stars in the universe, it wasn't small nor big. It was quite close to Earth and had been observed by scientists for many years. Whether it was its internal structure or its nuclear fusion method, it had been studied for a long time. Secondly, in terms of energy level, the remaining energy was just the limit of what it could bear. It wouldn't die from eating too much. Finally, and most importantly, the sun was rapidly expanding and its energy was spreading out at an extremely fast speed. Even if it couldn't completely devour it, it could disperse the remaining energy to other parts of the solar system in the form of shock waves to prevent the explosion caused by too much energy concentration. Olchen was obviously not a fool. He immediately realized what Zhang Cheng wanted to do and quickly stopped him. Are you crazy? Don't do anything stupid. This matter has already exceeded the scope of the trial. Leave it to us to handle. No, you can't interfere. Don't forget, the rules are the rules. I'm the one in charge of this trial. So before I'm killed, everything that happens is part of the trial. Arya argued loudly when she heard that Old Chun wanted to get involved again. After all, she had made so many preparations for this moment. If everything went to waste, then all her years of planning and hard work would have been for nothing. Rules? Huh, naive. The rules do not depend on you, but on us. Do you really think that the organization would give up on one of their own with a bright future for a worthless piece of trash? Don't be silly, Iria. You're just a pitiful captive. You have no right to bargain with us. Old Chin slapped the woman's face with disdain. Humiliation, sorrow, and indignation, despair. Arya seemed to recall the terrifying scene of her hometown being invaded, occupied, and destroyed by an endless army. No words could describe her feelings at this moment. However, just as she glared with her burning eyes, as if she wanted to tear these two men who looked extremely similar to each other apart, Zhang Cheng suddenly smiled and shook his head. No, I don't want to need anyone's help. Do you still remember our previous conversation? Since this is a trial that belongs to me, then it should be completed by me alone. Regardless of whether it succeeds or fails, it's a choice I made myself. Moreover, I don't think I'll fail." He blurted out the last word. He raised one end of the supreme heavenly god authority and aimed it at the star, while the other end pierced into his chest where his heart used to be. He then began to gather the enormous energy that was everywhere. In just a short dozen minutes, the light and heat generated by the expanding sun were all attracted to him without exception. They were converted into pure energy to strengthen the Titan's terrifying body. It was getting stronger and stronger. It was getting hotter and hotter. The temperature was getting higher and higher. Zhang Qing's metallic skin began to turn red at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if he was a piece of red-hot iron. An astonishing power was exuding from inside out. Some parts of his body even started to melt and crack slightly. There was no doubt that as the largest star in the solar system, and the only one that stored the most energy, the sun was not something any planet could compare to. Its energy was so enormous that even in its twilight years, it was still not something that one or two titans could withstand. However, Zhang Qing's body was not in the worst condition. The worst was the divine weapon, the supreme heavenly god authority. During the process of energy conversion, it had endured the most high temperature and was now densely covered with fine cracks. It was only maintained by the magic energy injected by its owner. Otherwise, it would instantly shatter into tiny particles that could not be seen by the naked eye. "Oh my God, you're really a lunatic." Old Qin narrowed his eyes and muttered softly to himself, although the mecha on his body had compressed an entire star as its power source. However, it was one thing to rely on technological means, and it was another to directly use one's body to contain an entire star. The latter was far more difficult and dangerous than the former. It was practically a joke with one's life. In contrast, Arya's eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation. She kept cursing in a voice that only she could hear. "Die. Go to hell. Arrogant lunatic. You won't succeed." However, to his disappointment, no matter how high the surface temperature of Zhang Qing's body rose, it still did not collapse. When it reached the highest critical point, the temperature began to drop slowly and finally returned to normal. The expanding sun in the distance also began to shrink unknowingly. When it had shrunk to a certain extent, it suddenly shrank rapidly and formed a star that emitted a cold white light. A white dwarf. This was the final fate of most stars that were not large enough in mass. Under normal circumstances, they would survive in this state for billions of years before finally perishing in the vast universe. Unfortunately, Zhang Qing clearly had no intention of letting go of the sun. He continued to absorb energy continuously. In the end, the entire white dwarf finally collapsed when its mass reached a certain level, forming a huge black hole that kept pulling in the surrounding planets. Chapter 1001. As the star turned into a black hole, the solar system finally ushered in an irreversible destruction. Although there were still many planets that had not been captured and swallowed by the black hole, it was only a matter of time. After all, there was no celestial body in the surroundings that had a gravitational force that could compare to the black hole. Watching Jupiter, Saturn, and other planets that were relatively far away slowly approaching the black hole, the corner of Old Qin's mouth rose slightly. He turned around and asked Arya, "Is this the result you wanted? To create a madman that you can never defeat?" "No, that's impossible. He's the same as me. Someone who relies on external forces to seize the core of a planet to obtain power. How could he swallow the energy of a star?" Arya's eyes flickered with unconcealable shock. She clenched her fists tightly, unwilling to admit the truth. From a psychological point of view, most people would not be willing to admit their mistakes, let alone admit that the enemy forced them to be strong and outstanding. She was no exception. Most importantly, the plan of destruction that she had spent a lot of time preparing had failed. "Oomph, idiot. Who do you think he is? He's one of us." From a moment the initiators awakened, an invisible force has bound us together. As long as we have the chance, we can become the most powerful beings in our respective universes. Tremble, fear, despair. The Superstring War is about to usher in a new overlord, a true stellar titan. Old Chun sneered without restraint. Nothing could make him happier than the addition of a powerful newcomer. Especially now that the Superstring War was at a critical moment, the organization urgently needed the help of a master of energy, mysticism, and alchemy. Then what do you plan to do with me? Arya was clearly used to the other party's attitude, so she directly asked the question she was most concerned about. Anyone who was not an idiot would know that she had gone overboard this time. At the very least, she had far exceeded the upper limit of the trial set by the organization, so she would definitely receive a terrifying punishment. However, she was not too worried that she would be executed directly. According to the organization's way of thinking, even if they were cannon fodder sent to the battlefield to exhaust each other, they would still have to exert their last bit of energy before they died, not to mention that she had absorbed half of the planet's core energy. Punish you? Old Chin shook his head meaningfully. No, including me, the organization will not punish you this time. On the contrary, your punishment will be decided by him. To put it simply, from the moment you passed the trial, you became his personal property. As for whether he wants to turn you into a weapon or a slave to vent his desires, it has nothing to do with us. Arya shuddered. She then shifted her gaze to the man she desperately wanted to kill. Zhang Cheng's eyes were still tightly shut, showing no signs of waking up. The immense energy of the star was flowing to every corner of his body at an extremely fast speed. His metallic body flickered with a dazzling golden light, as if he was undergoing some kind of drastic change. As for the paramount divine tool, it had already shattered into countless high-energy particles after completing its mission. These particles then revolved around his body. Moreover, because the sun had collapsed into a black hole, the interior of the galaxy was now pitch black. There was nothing to use as a reference to measure time, and the evolving Titan was the only source of light. No one knew how much time had passed. Perhaps it was a few hours, a few days, a few months, a few decades. The moment Zhang Cheng slowly opened his eyes, his entire body emitted a golden radiance that was comparable to the sun. Even the black hole in the distance was affected by the terrifying energy that was released in that instant. It rapidly became smaller and smaller, until it finally disappeared completely. Interesting. Is this the power of a star? He raised his right hand and muttered to himself with a calm expression. If a Titan was compared to a humanoid planet destroyer that could easily destroy a planet, then a stellar-level Titan, after evolution, would be a humanoid weapon that could easily destroy a not-so-big galaxy. The difference in quality and quantity between the two was completely like the ancient Viking pirates rowing a wooden sailboat and charging towards a modern warship with a displacement of more than 10,000 tons. The latter only needed to stretch out a finger to crush the former to death. How do you feel, my dear friend? Old Chin appeared at the side immediately and asked with a faint smile. Zhang Cheng hesitated for a moment, then immediately sighed and replied, "Not bad. Now I can feel the strings that are everywhere in the universe. The so-called Great String War you mentioned before. Don't tell me it's about seizing these strings and then breaking the shackles of time and space to advance to a higher level of the universe? Ha! No, not advance. Conquer. Our goal is to conquer all the extra-dimensional spaces covered by the multiverse. In the places covered by the organization, you either submit or be destroyed. There is no third option. Come, join us and see the absurd, bizarre, and mysterious true universe, instead of being trapped in this three-dimensional space forever." Old Chin laughed maniacally and extended his right hand. "Of course, this is also what I desire." Zhang Cheng did not hesitate to extend his right hand and tightly shake Old Chin's hand. There was no need for more words. Through some mysterious connection, they could feel the ambitions and thoughts in each other's minds. After a full minute, Old Chin turned around and pointed at Arya, who was left aside. "As a personal gift from me to welcome you, she is now your personal property." "For me?" Zhang Cheng looked at the woman who wanted to perish together with him with great interest. In fact, he did not hate her at all. nor did he have any thoughts of revenge. The reason was simple. If it was Zhang Cheng who was forcefully imprisoned in a place and knew that he was just a stepping stone for someone else, his actions would be 10,000 times crazier than when he caused a star to expand. Yes, her identity is very special. She is a direct descendant of the highest ruler of a certain planet in the higher universe. The organization destroyed the regime of that planet and transformed it into an advanced military base. You can understand that she was once a noble princess, and her soul contains the mysterious laws of a higher universe. Old Chun explained unhurriedly. She sounds like a good experimental subject, doesn't she? When he said this, Zhang Cheng's eyes that were as bright as stars flickered with a chilling light. It was clear that Arya had aroused a strong desire for knowledge and power in his heart. As for whether she was a princess or not, and whether she was beautiful, it was no longer important at this moment. What was important was that she had a measurable research value and was worth being dissected on a dissection table.